Doctors examine House MD diagnoses. We break down the genius and the fatal mistakes. Let me tell you, as an ER doctor, when the altered patient or trauma patient hasn't gotten their head CT scan until a week in after admission, something is screwed with that place. Son, that CT is the first thing I'm ordering out of the ED. No comment on his diagnostic skills. However, I've shown the scene of him asking a woman who kept running out of her MDI to demonstrate to him how she was using it as an example to my students of why patient teachback is so important. Don't assume that your patients understand their medications just because they don't have any questions. My OB-GYN friend had a patient who was, quote, taking her birth control pills by inserting them into her downstairs, because that's where the action was, right? And another patient who shared her pills with her partner. He took one day, she the next. This was because they wanted to share the responsibility for birth control. You should never assume people understand even something that seems simple. There was a doctor who maintained a blog throughout the original run of the show, commenting on the accuracy of the presentation and diagnostics of each case. The original site is gone now, but the Internet Archive has it saved. It was fun to reread it while doing a rewatch last year. I love Hugh Laurie, and I watched some of the show. It was wildly inaccurate with respect to medicine, but a pretty entertaining show. But as I said, hilariously inaccurate. Pro tip, you don't need 3 specialist doctors to run an MRI. It's a huge waste of time, and very unlikely any of them have any idea how to get a scan started in the first place, let alone how to read the images. I've got to say, prescribing 1 cigarette to help a patient's constipation has always stuck with me. Smokers know how quickly that first one of the day can get your guts going. Smoking for some reason helps people with ulcerative colitis, but it will make other conditions such as Crohn's worse. It's one of the only conditions where there may not be a huge push towards encouraging someone to quit smoking. I think it's worth keeping in mind that the show wasn't strictly medically themed as such. It was more of a modern Sherlock Holmes-style mystery show that was set in a hospital. They were never really going for medical realism. For those who never realized this, Holmes is House, Watson is Wilson, and House's address was 221B Baker Street, and the guy who shot House was named Moriarty, and the patient in the pilot episode, the schoolteacher who started speaking gibberish and collapsed in front of her class, was named Adler. I've never watched much of the show myself, but I do have to say that seems like the kind of vibe they might have been going for. Good little referential nods there. I remember an episode where they ruled out something by doing a muscle biopsy. It was such a throwaway thing, like it was as simple as a blood test and they got instant answers. Let me tell you, I've had a muscle biopsy. It's a full, proper surgery. I couldn't walk for 2 weeks, and it took 4 weeks for results to come back because it's apparently quite complicated pathology. House was like Scooby-Doo for adults. Mystery solved, gang. It's never lupus. Except for the one time where it was lupus. I have myasthenia gravis. The frickin' tensilon test on the bicycle road racer was hilarious. I went from drooping eyelids and severely slurred speech to having control over my face and hands, and then back again in like 5 minutes. I didn't fall down, but I was right back to slurring. That's one of my favorite and funniest moments in the show, and knowing it's even relatively accurate makes it even better. None of them. Honestly, the show is just so insanely inaccurate, it's impossible to remember and track. There's no central all-diagnosis super team. There's no super surgeon Robert Chase that's on said diagnosis team and then also somehow a plastic surgeon, neurosurgeon, orthopedist, general surgeon, and cardiothoracic surgeon. The guy would have had to be in residency until he was 65. The Pit was crazy accurate, albeit the nature of that shift wasn't accurate. Scrubs was oddly and beautifully close to accurate. To be fair, your point about his diagnostic group is also true in universe. House and his team are the exception because nobody wanted to actually hire House, and getting a Department of Diagnostic Medicine was one of his main things for working for Cuddy, and she only really agreed because she was infatuated with him. And the team does become both quite famous and notorious for their activities, even if they do solve some impossible cases. There's one episode where House sees a red thong and decides they must do a Congo red stain to test for amyloid. He comes in, "Quick, put the Congo red on, polarize the light." Dude, it takes me an hour to do a Congo red stain, and there ain't any magic microscope computer that can tell you it's type AA. There's one episode where Chase is tasked with doing gram stains all night. The next morning, House asks him if he had anything, and he says, "purple fingers," which amuses me greatly. Years ago, I brought the show up to my rheumatologist when my relatively rare disease was the diagnosis. He went on a long, angry rant about how any competent doctor can diagnose the cases in that show within the first 5 minutes. I didn't care. I'm not a doctor. Not exactly what you're asking for, but I have an example of something most real-world doctors could have caught. There was an episode where the patient turned out to have hemochromatosis. This essentially means that the body has a large buildup of iron in the bloodstream. I would be amazed if an actual doctor missed that on the blood work. There are cases of this happening. Score 1 for House, I guess. There used to be a Twitter thread about how all of the House episodes would have been solved with basic medicines, and all House did was prolong the process. I don't have the link. Maybe someone else has it. To be fair, the premise was that his patients came from other doctors that couldn't find what was wrong with them following basic process. Like they'd tell him patient has X and Y symptoms, and then he'd call them morons for not knowing the obvious. Then they'd say, X and Y obvious tests came back negative too, and then he'd get interested. And with dozens and hundreds of episodes, you run out of weird diseases to showcase on the show. I hate how many people either missed or forgot this premise of the show. I admit, the show is ridiculous, but I still enjoy it. But so many reviews rant on about how it's taken so long for House's team to do X, Y, and Z when they're basic diagnostic tests. But 99% of House's patients, there are a couple of episodes that show a direct admission to his team, they've already been seen and failed to be diagnosed or treated by normal doctors when they get there. House is a specialist for that which is unusual, so all of these basic tests have already been performed, and they have the results. House's team are rerunning a lot of tests, because something now suggests that the old results are wrong. House's own injury would have killed him before they actually diagnosed it. I'm not a doctor, but I work in the lab. One of the first episodes, they have a patient that they're worried was deficient in potassium. They broke into this person's house to see if they were right. A test for potassium can be done easily within 15 minutes of that blood work being drawn. There was also this one episode where they were checking for lupus. More specifically, they did an ANA test, and in real life this test is done using a fluorescent microscope and looking at where fluorescent-bound antibodies are binding on special cells. In the show, one of the characters kinda shook a clear test tube and was like, well, their ANA is negative. The foreman getting Naegleria fowleri and surviving it without any brain damage kind of ruined the show for me. That is almost always fatal, and there's no known treatment regimen with proven efficacy. The handful of known survivors reported in medical literature typically have a prompt diagnosis and initiation of amphotericin B. The foreman was definitely delayed on this. Because those patients survived with it, amphotericin B, with or without medication, is pretty much universally given in Naegleria cases, and the vast majority of people still die anyway. Just don't swim in freshwater lakes or ponds, people, and definitely plug your nose if you do. I mean, at some point you have to stop living in fear and evaluate the relative risk of certain activities. There has only been 167 cases in the United States in the past 60 years over how many billion occurrences of people swimming in freshwater. Even if you assume it's underreported by a factor of 100, I think there's other things to worry about, like falling down and hitting your head on your steps because you've neglected to wrap yourself in bubble wrap before leaving your house. None of his patients had the chance of affording him in the US healthcare system. Can you imagine the bill for having the attention of multiple top-notch doctors all day for several days? And often several tests rushed, which I assume doubles the cost. Only billionaires could be patients at House's hospital. Oh my god, that's so true. Yes, this is the second time the nature of their workings has come up, and when you put it that way, yes, the show is true fiction. But apparently good enough TV to keep people coming back to it, like most lauded shows about individuals in a given profession. I am binge-watching House MD. Everyone's favorite diagnostician for the first time, and some of the fantastical scenarios, while implausible, are still interesting. The show has some wild cases, and of course the classic House diagnostic loop: throw out 3 exotic conditions, treat the wrong one, nearly kill the patient, then circle back to the first idea they had. So I'm curious, which diagnoses or treatments were actually brilliant medicine? Which ones would have worked outside of TV land? And if the patients were real, how many would have actually survived? For days, months, or years? Oh, my husband and I would play a drinking game for whenever they suggested lupus or sarcoidosis. The large amount of crime the gang participates in is hardcore unrealistic. Not just because it's crime and no doctor would agree to lose their license that way over one job, but it wouldn't even help the case 99.99999% of the time. Yes, patients lie, but doctors word their questions in confusing ways, don't ask the right ones in the first place, or the patient tries to tell them something and the doctor ignores the info. As hard as possible. Like refuses to take the piece of paper a patient is trying to hand them, ignoring the patient. The social aspect between patients and doctors in-house is very different than in real life. Still love it though. Gotta say, the episode where they used ketamine to treat House's leg pain was ahead of its time, and I have to credit it with being able to discuss alternative treatments for chronic pain. I'm not a doctor, I'm just someone with chronic pain that nobody was willing to treat without narcotics for a long, long time. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe to Am I the Genius? Look, everyone actually had lupus. He was just making all of that other crap up. Toothpick guy, lung cancer non-smoker with curved fingers, pig crap breather guy, and Robin Tunney as RFK Jr. with the brainworm would all be toast. I'm not a physician, but there's an episode where he's treating a lady in just the brief clinic thing, not the main case of the episode. She hit her head in a car wreck like a week prior and damaged her pituitary gland, causing diabetes insipidus from a lack of antidiuretic hormone. He figured it out just because she had been drinking a lot of water. I saw that episode just before my interview for my very first paramedic job. During the interview, I was given an oral scenario for a fairly similar patient. Now, DI wasn't really covered during paramedic school back then. It's still not given much attention. I don't think it was even covered in class, and it was like 2 sentences in the entire textbook, basically just saying it existed. I took the risk and sent it explaining that I thought the patient had damaged their pituitary in a fall that the family mentioned they'd had prior to symptoms starting and had developed diabetes insipidus, causing their electrolytes to be out of balance because they weren't reabsorbing water normally. They were so impressed I got immediately offered the job and was able to negotiate higher starting pay. I've made more money and gotten better opportunities at every agency I've ever worked on based on that one stupid interview where I rolled the dice on a random writer on House having done their homework. Looking back at the show now with a lot more medical education and experience, the main cases tend to be really exaggerated and incorrect, but the little random throwaways were often fairly accurate. Look, you have to understand the show wasn't written by doctors. It was written by TV writers with no background knowledge of medicine. None of it's brilliant medicine, it's just entertainment, even if they did have doctors on as advisors from time to time. As an electrician, I found it to be very accurate. I'm not a doctor, but it's my all-time favorite show, watching it with my daughter now. She was inspired to study science and she found she loves it. She's considering becoming a doctor as a result. I don't care if the show is accurate or not, it inspired a love of science in my kid and I'm forever grateful. I went into medicine because of ER, it's my biggest regret. If she's seriously considering it, have her shadow the specialty she's interested in. TV shows don't show the horrible parts of medicine, which in all honesty is pretty much most of it. The first few seasons were good cases, but then drama. I'd split the show into 2 categories. There's the brilliant, like House diagnosing rare autoimmune or metabolic disorders with just a hunch, stuff like the guy with the exploding leg veins or the girl whose body literally produced its own poison. Those are surprisingly plausible in the real world. Some clever doctors actually do solve crazy cases like that. Then there's the no-hope IRL cases, pretty much every patient who follows House's break-all-the-rules treatments. Giving someone a risky med with zero testing, doing experimental surgeries without consent, or letting them near a tapeworm trial? Most of those people would have died or sued in real life. Basically, House's genius works on TV, not in any hospital worth its malpractice insurance. I'm an ENT, and the kid with the cochlear implant stood out to me. 1. A general surgeon can't do a cochlear implant. Not all ENTs even do them. And 2. He did it at the same time as a dirty abdominal case. You don't do clean and dirty cases together. That's how you get E. coli meningitis. And 3. Cochlear implants require you to order an expensive device. They don't just keep a device that's more expensive than your car on the shelf of the hospital. And you have to have a specially trained audiologist in the operating room with you to program it. As a doctor, House was probably my favorite medical drama. All the others except Scrubs are kind of all the same. That being said, the medicine in it was all over the place. I wouldn't say any of the diagnoses were particularly brilliant because almost none of the conditions were diagnosed the way they would be in real life. I always get a kick out of the one where they diagnosed the foreman with a neural amoeba infection, and then they get the diagnosis and poof, he's better. There's no cure for that disease. I saw it during the year in medical college when we had the subject of microbiology. We had to study the amoeba and even looked it up for this episode. We even had a discussion about the topic in question amongst us friends because mortality at that time in 2014 was 99%, with only 1 or 2 reported survival cases. Current mortality rate is still 97 to 98%, so at the time it aired, in 2006, survival stats had to be even lesser. I hate it when they pretend that the diagnostic imaging is done by doctors sitting in a room watching patients being scanned. Those guys are never around. It's done by medical radiation technologies. Wait, are you guys saying my University of Gregory House medical degree might be worthless? Foreman was negligent for not seeing rabies in that woman. A frickin' bat flew from her homeless shanty tent. I always laugh when I watch House and the MDs are administering the meds and taking blood and tissue samples rather than the nursing staff. There's almost no nursing staff portrayed in the show. Absurd. Well, I guess the focus of the show was on these wizards who can answer the questions nobody else can, rather than the actual goddamn heroes slumming it day to day to care for people. And if you want more about nurses, there are plenty more grounded shows. It's crazy how many people are saying Scrubs is pretty accurate, for instance. Don't know about the best, but the worst is definitely the case where the woman had high levels of beta-HCG, but the ultrasound of her uterus showed no pregnancy. The 3 experienced doctors immediately think the blood test was faulty or something until House barges in and redoes the ultrasound, and it's an ectopic pregnancy. This is Medicine 101. Woman with an active bedroom life with high blood levels of BHCG and an empty uterus? Look for that fetus everywhere else before jumping to other less likely conclusions. My husband has had 2 cochlear implants, so I know how the process works. The stupidest episode, in my opinion, had a deaf teenager who didn't want a cochlear implant. House had Chase implant one without the boy's knowledge or consent, then turned it on in a couple of days. That is not at all how you get one of those. That's just insane. I don't know, but I've always asked my doctor friends how they decide when to break into a patient's home. I like how House didn't see the patients. My wife and I joke with each other every time we go to a clinic that we didn't see House, so he must be our doctor. What's funny is that I'm pretty sure he sees 99% of the patients, but they still pretend it's a big deal whenever he does. The show never pretended to be accurate. 2 obvious winks at the audience off the top of my head. House hides a bottle of Vicodin in a book about lupus and says, "It's never lupus." House calls another doctor, pretending to be writing for a TV show, and asks if a disease could survive in a sealed bottle underwater for a very long time. The doctor says, "Yes, but," and then House ends the call. It was intentionally ridiculous, people. There was one episode that featured a disease that I happen to be very familiar with, POTS, and to their credit, the patient of the week did have a very classy presentation of it, but where it fell off for me was a whole team of fancy diagnosticians taking a week to reach the diagnosis, when it was such a classic presentation that anyone who'd done so much as an internship round in cardio would have known it instantly. It wasn't bad writing exactly, not by the lax standards of that show anyway, but it definitely cracked me up because it should have been one of the 10-second bits of House looking at a chart, yelling a diagnosis, and wandering off again. I'm not a doctor, but I'm pretty sure there are more nurses at a real hospital. There's like 5 people working there, and they're all House's team. I want to be a nurse at House's hospital. All they do is carry clipboards and give people dirty looks. Bringing a live pig into the hospital to exchange blood with a patient? Yeah, totally normal. I do it all the time. A lot of those weird early seasons cases are actually based on real-life happenings. Pig liver is weird, but it has been done. Dr. House should have been dead from taking too much Tylenol, as well as liver failure, like 3 episodes in. Tylenol? That's paracetamol. House dropped Vicodin like it was candy. Although the paracetamol portion of Vicodin would have caused bad side effects, the hydrocodone would have given him the runs. Half the House stuff did would have had the hospital sued into oblivion, but the medical mystery angle was still fun to watch. In real life, most of those patients probably wouldn't have made it past episode 2. Anytime the doctors were running the labs or performing the tests themselves would be a no-hope scenario in my opinion. Doctors do not perform the testing. That's for medical laboratory scientists to do. I'm glad I watched the show before I became an MLS. I probably would have been yelling at the TV a lot. This really went off the rails. House may have been bullcrap, but he did stay focused on the question at hand. As a thioma-associated myasthenia gravis patient myself, I can say the 2 MG-related episodes didn't really represent my experience, but anyone dying of stage 2 thymoma is borderline ridiculous to me. Mine was stage 3 and we did radiation after surgery just to be sure, but the first thing my radio-oncologist assured me is that it's one of the tumors that reacts extremely well to radiation, and while of course a serious diagnosis, it has good outcomes with great treatment options. Asking doctors what they think of House MD is like asking police to solve cases watching Detective Conan.
What would be a funny thing to say to a surgeon before anesthesia kicks in 5 seconds later? I had broken my wrist and was being put under to have 4 pins inserted. They gave me anesthesia through an IV, and I felt coldness spreading up my arm and across my chest. The nurse asked how I was doing, and I said, "This must be what dying feels like." I heard her say, "Oh my God," and then I was out. So, did you die? Yes. Dude, I broke my wrist too. 4 pins and a plate, same exact sensation, comment, and a shocked face response from the anesthesiast. Are you me? You're me reincarnated. Can't believe you're dead. Yeah, the worst part is how much the Wi-Fi in this casket sucks. I'm sure the Wi-Fi will be the least of his worries once his battery dies. Wow, I actually have a relevant story that happened recently. As I was getting ready to go under, they were placing a device in my mouth to keep me from biting down on the scope they were going to use for the endoscopy. Think medical ball gag, but a hard plastic ring instead of a ball. As the gal was placing it in, I asked, "Wait, what's the safe word?" I heard a good amount of laughing as the world turned black. "I'm awake" would probably be a good safe word. Related comment, but doesn't really answer the question. My dad was in the middle of a surgery repairing some pretty nasty damage on his wrist after a skiing accident. He was under heavy anesthesia, but the surgeons were having serious trouble with the screws in his wrist, which apparently jarred him around enough to wake him up. He noticed their struggles and managed to say, "Righty-tighty, lefty-loosey." Then he passed back out. This is the most dad thing I've ever heard. How do you keep a surgeon in suspense? This is the best one yet. Shame it's buried so deep in the thread. It's over my head. Explanation, please? Okay, here's what it means. I hate you so much for that joke. Before going under for wisdom teeth, the doctors said I might feel funny. They pushed the drugs and asked if I felt any different. My butthole, and only my butthole, began to itch like crazy. And it was hot. Not warm, hot, like I just ate peppers with my butt. I told them my butthole is itching like crazy, and the assistant was really bad at holding back a laugh. The doc resisted mightily, but he too succumbed to my newly discovered butthole emotions. They actually gave me some kind of drug that had the exact same effect when I had surgery. They warned me prior though, and I kind of laughed it off until it actually happened. Newly Discovered Butthole Emotions is the title of my memoir. As the anesthesiologist was putting me under, he said I'd start to feel sleepy soon. I asked him, "Aren't I supposed to be counting back from 100 or something?" He replied, "I don't know, I must have skipped that class." Being an anesthesiologist must be awesome as you can always get the last word in. The last anesthesiologist I had messed with me too. He asked what I did for a living, so I told him, and he said, "Wow, that's a cool job. I wish I'd done something like that instead of this." Ugh. Well, bye. And I was out. But I woke up laughing, which was great for an otherwise stressful and confusing day. Got my spleen out a few years back. My anesthesiologist said, "Did you get some photos of that thing? Because once we got it, it's gone." Right before I blacked out. Those guys have always been my favorite every time I've had surgery. They're so chill and funny, and somehow that doesn't concern me since they're the ones basically keeping you alive. Had surgery about a year ago. As the anesthesiologist was getting me ready, he asked me if I'd done anything fun recently. I'd just gotten back from the Sasquatch Music Festival, so I told him that. Last thing I remember him saying was, "Well, this will feel more like a Grateful Dead concert." I was being put under for a wisdom tooth extraction a few years back, and it was the first time I'd ever had anesthesia. They used injection method rather than the gas, so they told me to watch the fluids going in so I could gauge when I'd feel sleepy. I had this idea I would say something like, "Oh no, doc, I've lost my eyesight," or something else preposterous. Before I could collect my thoughts, I just immediately blurted, "Well, and passed out. Last time I went under, as I started to fade, I said, "You're gonna have to drive, I'm messed up." Probably came out, "You're gonna have to drive, I'm messed up." I said something similar, except it was when I woke up. The doc asked how I was feeling and I said, "Fine, I've been drunker than this before. Good thing I'm not driving." I was seriously messed when I woke up from that chair. Despite what I said, I have never been so drunk I needed a wheelchair and 2 people to get me in the car. When I had my exploratory laparotomy for ovarian cancer, I wrote on my chest, "Insert superpowers here," with the arrow pointing down to the incision site. Waking from anesthesia one time, I heard someone say, "His blood pressure is a little high." Then I mumbled, "That must be the anesthesiast assistant's fault." Then they kind of startled and asked quickly, "Why's that?" Becoming slightly more coherent, I continued to say, "She's really hot." They all laughed and said, "He'll be fine," and released me from there. I had some temporary amnesia after waking up from an hour-long emergency surgery. My girlfriend was there and found me staring puzzled at her. "Hey, Sleepy, it's me, your girlfriend." Me. "Wow, I must be a lucky dude." Happily together for more than 2 years now. Plot twist, the assistant was a big hairy dude. I'm okay with that. So after my dad had a triple bypass and was just waking up and they'd removed the breathing tube, I was in the room with him. I said something along the lines of, "Everything went perfect with your surgery, Dad, no problems." My dad in his drug haze said, "That is because I am a perfect specimen of the human male and it couldn't have gone any other way." Nurses were cracking up. If he was a perfect specimen, he wouldn't have needed a triple bypass now, would he? Got to admit they have a point. If something goes wrong and I go into a coma, don't you dare cut my coma beard. Yes, ma'am. I had to get some surgery that involved cutting open my head. Right before they gassed me, I said, "I should warn you, there's a spooky skeleton in there." The last thing I remember is his response of, "I'll try to look out for that." Did they find it? I don't know if they found it, but I'm pretty sure part of it escaped. If I don't make it through this, then tell my wife I want her to be buried alive with me. If I don't make it out alive, tell my wife I changed the Netflix password and she'll never know it. You're a sick person. Tell my wife I love her. Work ethic. Or just, if I don't make it through this, tell my wife. I would hope someone would tell her. They had a thing checking my heart and it fell off and it flatlined. I told them, "Oh no, you've killed me. Quick, we're losing me." For a second, I thought it was referring to your heart, like your heart fell out onto the floor. It was an awful botched wisdom tooth extraction. I tend to get massive erections while under anesthesia, but it's fine, just tape it down if it gets in the way. We'll just cover it with this thimble. Yo, let me know if you see my phone in there. This is so dumb yet so good. Keeping this for my next colonoscopy. When I got my wisdom teeth out, the dentist's office was right next to a funeral home. I told the guy that if anything went horribly wrong, they could just take me next door. Mother and doctor were not amused. I mean, at least it's close and convenient. As they were pushing the drugs, they asked me to count down backwards from 10. All I could say was no. The room erupted with laughter and I was out. When I was a kid, they told me to count back from 10, so I did. I got all the way to 0 and all the doctors were looking at one another extremely confused. Then, just before they were about to do something, I conked out. I had my wisdom teeth out a couple weeks ago. I really hate the idea of going unconscious, so when they told me it's starting and if I wanted to count backwards from 10, I was like, don't tell me. I wanted to just pretend like I was falling asleep on my own. That seems entirely reasonable to me. They told me to breathe in and that I would pass out by the 3rd breath. 1 breath later and I'm waking up in the waking room. They never even gave me a chance. Can you count backwards from 10? Will I, or am I able to? I had my appendix removed in 2007. I was in the prep room about to get on the anesthesia and the anesthesiologist kept asking me what my name was as he was about to put me under. After 3 times, I remember saying, even though I keep saying it, I just forgot. Crap. And then I was out. I had to have a pilonidal cyst removed from my butt crack and can remember giggling like a madman because I asked the entire operating room, "So who drew the short straw and has to shave my butt?" The honest answer to that question is the medical student. I shaved so many butts, and then you have to take tape and use it to collect all the shaved hairs so they don't get all over the sterile field. Ugh. So glad I'm not going into surgery. When I had my wisdom teeth removed and was given general anesthetic, I apparently said, "If this is what being on drugs is like, sign me up." He went and told on me to my mother. I said a similar thing when I had minor surgery done. I got shot up with something to take the edge off before they rolled me into the operating room. I remember announcing that the drug they gave me felt like being drunk, but without all the calories. Apparently, I spent a good amount of time telling the dentist all about my aunt's goat farm. When the doctor told my mom this, she replied, "His aunt doesn't have a goat farm." The fact that you said if should be good news for her. It would have been worse if you had said, these are the best drugs I've had since that Colombian gap year. Luckily, I cried about going home to feed my pet hamster. I never had a pet hamster. Same experience, but apparently I said, man, I need to do this again. I asked for a tummy tuck while being wheeled in for a bowel resection. I said, while you're cutting it open, just cut some off. Then when I was done with my surgery, but still pretty messed up on drugs, I asked if I was skinny and then cried when my doctor told me he didn't give me the tummy tuck. I asked for a tummy tuck after both of my C-sections. Doc gave me the same answer each time. I make it work, I don't make it pretty. I went in for an endoscopy and colonoscopy, or as the staff referred to it, a double. Before they put me under, the doc asked if I had any questions. I said, just so I'm clear, you're putting a tube in my mouth and in my rear, right? Right. Can you put it in my mouth first? Don't worry, if we start in the other end, we'll just spit on it and wipe it off. That's hilarious. I love when they're jokey. When doctors are too serious, it makes me uncomfortable. Right before I went under to have surgery on my septum, I was about to start counting backwards before they put the mask on, and I asked, does anyone need anything while I'm out? The last thing I remember was an OR room full of people laughing hysterically. I'm gonna need to get surgery just so I can use this. Legit Bill Murray level. I like it. The other way around, I was cracking jokes with the nurses and anesthesiologist before a big surgery and everyone was laughing. Anesthesiologist turns to me and says, well, it's not fair that you're the only one not on anything, and then hit me with the anesthesia and I was out. That's awesome. First thing on waking up, run hands over own body to make sure all parts are there. Seriously though, you could wake up feeling pretty scared after that. I said to my doctor during my wisdom teeth extraction, Doc, don't start, I'm still awake. To which he said, we're already done. Those drugs are legit. Actually, it's scary just how much you don't feel time pass while under those drugs. Last thing I remember on my last wisdom tooth surgery, I told the dentist that I worked with food grade nitrous and that it might take a small amount more. Don't know if I said anything afterward. I woke up in their recovery room. To the surgeon and nurse, I just want you both to know, good luck. We're all counting on you. I'd imagine you waking up several times during surgery to say that line again. Pre-op, Marco. Post-op, Polo. Simple, straight to the point, no fluffer. This is perfect. Pre, Legend. Post, Dairy. I told them that I hadn't pooped that morning, and if I pooped on them, it's their fault for scheduling the surgery at 6 a.m. Then I passed out. Well, don't leave us hanging, did you? Nah, painkiller's so good, I didn't poop for a week. I feel like as the doctor in this situation, you'd just be on guard the entire time. Last time I went under, I started to feel a sort of paralysis and couldn't move. Me. Whoa, did you just give me something? Nurse. Yes, just relax and don't fight it. Me. Okay, but you should sell this stuff in the gift shop. Everybody laughs. Surgeon. Are you okay? Me. Yeah, but I'm disappointed there's no cake. Surgeon. On the recovery notes, write, give the patient cake. Next thing I know, I'm waking up in the recovery room with a slice of chocolate cake on the table next to me. I should have asked for cake. Hell yeah, free cake. I'm envisioning an episode of Seinfeld where George figures out he can get free cake by this simple little trick and ends up having multiple operations just for more cake. I do have to say though, kudos to the doctor for taking care of all their patients' needs. My wife went to the dentist last weekend. After several shots of numbing, she sang to him, I can't feel my face when I'm with you. To the dentist's credit, without batting an eyelid, he replied in full voice, 'cause I numbed it. When my appendix burst, I was being wheeled in, and as the doctor was getting ready and I was about to pass out, he said, geez, this is rusty, and held up a scalpel. I could tell he was joking, and off I went to sleep. When I woke up, he came to check on me, and the first thing he said was, have you seen my watch? I swear, he was a very funny man, and it really helped calm me down in a situation where I nearly died. Okay, so I know this is late in the thread, but when I was 15, I had tight foreskin around my penis and I opted for circumcision. My doctor, Dr. Lenz, was the funniest dude I've ever met. He told me I was gonna have something like a frankenpenis for a month or two, but it's cool. Anyways, I'm in the OR on Christmas Eve and I feel the anesthesia starting to kick in, and before Dr. Lenz walks out, I shout/slur, Doc, please just take care of the little guy. And he stops, turns around, bows to me and says, as if he were my own. I laughed once and passed out. I was being wheeled into emergency abdominal surgery once, and my girlfriend was with me. We're rolling down the hall, and they have the mask out to put me under, and I pause and I say to her, "Don't let them touch my penis." The nurse smirked a little, and they put the mask on me. In a somewhat panicked fashion, I pulled the mask off, stared up at my girlfriend, and with full weight and seriousness told her they can look at it, but no touching. I heard the doctor laughing as the gas kicked in. Best part is, there's a good chance they gave you a catheter. I had a nervous moment when I had my surgery when the nurse came in afterwards and says, "Okay, we need to take the catheter out." I did a double take and said, "I feel like this is something I should have noticed." That and the first thing I said when I woke up was telling my nurse she was beautiful and then immediately puking blood. Don't worry, I'm sure she was charmed by your interaction. Similar, I had some kidney stones and they had to go up there to unblock my parts, if you know what I mean. As I was waking up from anesthesia, I apparently asked, "How many people saw my pee-pee?" A few minutes later, as I was a little more coherent, I asked the nurse what's the craziest thing she heard from someone waking up from anesthesia. Her answer, "How many people saw my pee-pee?" Good times. So, how many people saw your pee-pee? Never actually got an answer, but I would probably say 4 or 5. It's just funny because who calls it a pee-pee after their 5th birthday? Who's the guy with the scythe standing in the corner? Oh, that's the other surgeon. He's just sitting in. I just went under this past week. I told my doctor, I better not wake up with any penises drawn on my face. The room had a laugh and I went to sleep, and they performed the worst magic trick ever and made a camera disappear up my butt. I remember being a celeb at the hospital after I said, "I love my girlfriend because she's got big boobies." When I'd go in, I'd have doctors and nurses teasing me. I was 16 at the time. Here's to relapsing. This is so wrong, I'll have to remember it. If the doc doesn't realize you're joking, this is a great way to not get prescribed any real pain medication for after the surgery. I beat the anesthesia. Had a patient fight anesthesia once. After his head hit the pillow, the anesthesiologist said, "Resistance is futile." I laughed so hard at this, my cab driver literally just asked me if I was okay. A couple of years ago, while I was being prepped for bone surgery, I had a good rapport with the anesthesiologist. My dad is one, and we kept talking about pain management and such. He pushed the dose of ketamine and propofol into my IV, and my brain was getting foggy. I remember seeing him laughing as I went to sleep. When I woke up, my friend who was attending the surgery told me that while I was dozing off, I told the surgeon, "This is my very first time trying ketamine unrecreationally." Hopefully he doesn't say anything to your dad at the next conference. Has anyone here ever been a soldier fighting against the US? What was it like? My grandfather was conscripted to fight for the North Korean military during the Korean War. He was at the Battle of Incheon, and he likened the dread that he felt to what one must feel when faced with a massive tidal wave that is about to engulf you and everyone you know. Couple this with the fact that many North Korean troops were told horror stories, that the American troops were cannibals, for example, and that the average American Marine was much taller and more physically robust than the average North Korean soldier. You can imagine how scared he was. He said that the Chinese and North Korean units were absolutely obliterated and that they never stood a chance against the Marines. All his words, not mine. My uncle, who I'll be seeing in a week for Thanksgiving, was there. He's 86 now. He still will not talk about it. His kids did not know he was in Korea until they were in their mid to late 20s. I remember when I was little, he would mow the lawn without a shirt, and I could see the scars on his abdomen. When I asked about them, he said they were from having his appendix taken out. Clearly not the case as an adult looking back on it. To this day, he is a staunch pacifist. This is much akin to the horror stories told in Japan after America dropped the atomic bombs, that American troops were savages who were going to come into Japan and rape all the women. That is why there was such a high suicide rate in Japan in the months after the war. Terrifying stuff. This is true. My grandfather tells me stories about Korea. He's a US Marine. He tells me about how easy it was to just mow through any resistance ever. I condensed this part. The only thing he said that ever scared him over there was waking to an earthquake. I was just a 7-year-old kid when my parents were watching CNN/BBC while I was playing video games. It was about some army jets taking off during the night. My dad turned to me and said something along the lines of, "It's begun, get to the basement now." Sometime later, the first explosions could be heard. The NATO/US bombing of Serbia in '99 had started. I remember spending time in the basement with other residents. I remember how the building shook when the bombs exploded. The fear of what was coming after the sirens went off. They destroyed all 3 bridges across across the Danube in my city, cutting us off from a part of our family. One day, a bomb hit the refinery, so we couldn't stay in the basements anymore because of the CO2. Then, a bomb hit about 100 meters from our building, and shrapnel went through the blinds and windows and embedded itself in the opposite wall of our neighbor's flat. That was when we decided to move somewhere else where the Americans had nothing to aim for. A smaller town. We were safer there, but we could still hear the jets flying above us and bombs going off in the distance. When someone shot down the F-117 stealth jet, it was a huge hell yeah moment for Serbia. That's my short story of surviving a war versus USA. Edit, I forgot to mention they were supposedly only bombing tactical targets. One of my professors was an undergrad in Serbia during the war. A major government building in Belgrade was hit and the whole house shook violently like an earthquake. It was a very old stone building that collapsed. It was crazy. Her and a professor of hers tried to spend the time, the university got bombed a few times, trying to make some rudimentary communication device that the Serbian soldiers could use. That's really crazy. Hopefully this won't get buried, but my hopes are not too high. My father was a sniper during the bombardment in Yugoslavia, and my best friend's father was a member of the elite unit called Tigers while the war in Kosovo was raging. I'll be short because I have to sleep, but my father told me it was like trying to repel a wave on the beach by building a castle out of sand. You fought, you may have won some small encounters, be it by accident or pure luck, but you always knew that if they wanted, they could just kill us all and be done with it. Not a nice time for Yugoslavia, that's for sure. I was in Kosovo during the war. My sister almost got killed by a Serbian sniper. That's crazy. Like I said in another comment, that's how the KLA felt against the Serbian military. I don't think it was as bad as the US, but Serbia was fighting farmers with AK-47s. My dad was never with us, and I was scared I would never see him again. Some of my cousins died fighting. Others never returned from prison camps. We would hear horrible stories about Serbian soldiers and how they were animals. When we were marching across the border into Macedonia, some of the soldiers would give us food and tell us that they were sorry for what we were going through. It was surreal, and we didn't trust them. We actually threw the food away because we thought it was poisoned, even though we were starving. Now I realize that they were just trying to stop the suffering, I guess. Yugoslavia may have been bad, but it was nothing compared to time in Kosovo during the war. My great uncle fought on the German side of World War II. He fought all over the place. Africa, Italy, a small stint in Russia, and he defended France from the D-Day invasion. He was later able to move to the United States as a war refugee. He said that all of his officers would constantly tell him, when you're fighting the Americans, you must think of the least probable way they will attack you, because that will be the way that they attack you. He also said that when you were fighting Americans, more so than any other country's army he fought, you had to have eyes on the back of your head. Thank you for sharing. I always find it more than impressive to hear of soldiers who fought on more than one front in World War II. Sebastian Junger very briefly touches on this in War. He writes at length about how incredibly terrifying and physically transforming it is to be in combat for American soldiers. Given all that, Junger then asks one of the American soldiers what it must be like for a Taliban combatant to face off against an Apache helicopter, and the soldier pretty much just shudders. I remember watching a documentary where some Dutch, journalist joins the Taliban to film what it's like for them for like 3 months. Can't recall the name at the moment. At one point, the unit he's with gets information that their commander's position has been compromised and has to move to another location. It's briefly mentioned that the Taliban are used to attacks by drones, etc. However, the commander is seen to be visibly worried because it might be an AC-130. Edit, the name of the documentary is Taliban Behind the Masks, thanks to AmITheA for finding it. The part which I am talking about is at 23 minutes onward. From a combat tour in Afghanistan, I can definitely attest to that. When the Apache/fast movers/AC-130 gunships show up, all of a sudden no one wants to play anymore. My great uncle was on the Italian side in World War II and was a captured POW to America. From what he told me, people wanted to be captured by the US. They were treated badly by their own and how great America was. In World War II, the Germans and some of our allies often commented on how chaotic the US Army appeared to be. I believe the quote was, "War is chaos and the American Army practices it on a daily basis." Other armies were slow, disciplined, methodical, etc. The perception was that Americans were unpredictable, undisciplined, but prone to ingenuity. Not just our generals, but right down to the grunt soldier level. I understand most who fought us viewed this as a strength. I remember reading an article a while back that one of the reasons Americans were so unpredictable to Europeans was the fact that they were one of the first national armies to use guerrilla tactics. And then we literally got a masterclass from fighting the various Indian wars. Gonna be buried, but oh well. My dad was an anti-aircraft gunner in Hanoi during the Vietnam War. He still wakes up screaming in the middle of the night. Quite often, really. My dad did basic training in Vietnam before he managed to escape, but as a kid, I remember him telling me stories about how messed up everything was during wartime. He was in his 20s when it was all going down, but he remembers walking through a field with his friends, and in a split second, several of them blew up from a landmine. Another story he told me that sticks with me to this day was when some of his friends were out drinking the night before they were supposed to enlist. Sitting around a table, completely hammered, singing songs, and trying to forget about the terrible things they may have to encounter, one of the friends dropped a grenade underneath and ended it all before the hell even began. I had the opportunity to be OPFOR, pretend batteries, for a Spec Ops raid one night recently. We all had basic roles to play to make sure the good guys got practice at typical scenarios, but we were allowed to do whatever we wanted within the confines of the role we were given. My role was to be a squirter from the main target building. When the raid rolled up, I was to fire off some rounds and bolt as fast as possible over a hilly area and take up cover in an adjacent building. Then, when and if they came to my building, try to light up as many good guys as possible before being shot. The blacked out Hummers roll up and I unload my rounds. After emptying a mag, I bolt for the second building. I'm not usually a nervous type of person, but it was either the sprint or the fact that those Hummers were really terrifying, but my heart rate didn't slow down after I'd stopped running. I remember thinking two things. First, how strange it was that I was so scared, since I knew we were using simunition and this was a war game. And second, that I knew for a fact I was going to die. I was outnumbered and outmatched. They had night vision and I was armed with a single AK-47. The sense of dread was really vivid, and I remember imagining noises and sights and kept playing out an operator sneaking up behind me in my mind. The next surprising thing was that when they rolled up to my building, they weren't sneaky or silent as I imagined in the books, just as before. Yet they also weren't yelling at each other like I had learned from cop shows when they clear rooms. They were all talking to each other in calm voices and using first names, relaying information about the current situation in a methodical manner. I had left a light at one corner of the building in hopes that I could spring a trap from the other. I turned the corner and unloaded a magazine as fast as possible at the parked Hummer, barely aiming. All I could think about is the 10 to 20 guns all silently hunting for the slightest movement. Then, and I'll never forget this, I saw the most eerie sight imaginable, a red dot, bigger than I'd picture or ever seen at the range, racing across the sand towards me. As I threw in a new mag and turned the other direction to check my 6, I had just enough time to catch the second red dot repeating the first move as if they were synchronized divers. I've never been more impressed and mortified in my life. The next thing I felt was pretty surreal. In short, I was hit in the chest and in the back at the exact same moment by two operators rounding the sides of the building. I was on a corner. As I retreated from one side of the building to the other, fearing the first shooter, I ran directly into his counterpart. Their bullets, simunition, contacted me at approximately the same place on my chest and back. I listened to them clear the inside of the building. Those same cool methodical voices. First names. Nothing like what I imagined. Then they searched my dead body. They began to take off my mask, paintball type contraption, to ID my face, and the plastic was cutting into my eyebrow. So I reached up to help them take it off without hurting me. One of the operators standing watch over me almost shot me and politely asked me to inform them verbally of any other movements I would make. Anyway, to wrap this long story up, afterwards I met all the guys that were on the op. There were about 20 and they were all smart as hell. Many of them had gone to college and enlisted anyway in order to join Spec Ops. Several of them spoke multiple languages and none of them were what I imagined. They were all humble, completely professional, and extremely thankful for us volunteers that they lit up. Basically, I don't know how it would feel to fight US soldiers with real ammo, and it made me pray I never will. It seemed pointless. Disclaimers, these guys weren't practicing with air support that night. It would have been even more terrifying with that on my mind. Also, a friend of mine who's an operator wasn't sure why they'd have red dots equipped while using night vision goggles. I have no idea, I just know what I saw. Maybe it was an intimidation factor? I don't know. It almost made me poop myself. You don't really wear night vision goggles to move around. Navigating stairs and other rough terrain, you want full field of view and true depth perception. Granted, I've only had really limited experience using them on exercises. Maybe special forces types wear them so much they can function with no depth perception and a tiny field of view. And the red dot's great for snap shooting with or without NVGs anyway. I'm military, but not in a trade that uses either of these. I just turn a screwdriver and explain to the guys who bring busted stuff in why using the radio to hammer tent pegs is a bad idea. While I cannot speak from experience, I'm an American, I can relay something my father mentioned to me a few years ago. He was a Marine during the conflict in Grenada, and he was also active during the first Gulf War. He has never gone into great detail about his combat history, and frankly, I wouldn't want to have him rewalk those moments. But he did mention one time how you can see a man's fear before you see him. Kind of cryptic, I know, but that one statement says a lot. He mentioned how you could hear them yelling and that the yells were not the confident kind. He meant that these men knew they were about to fight Americans and all their fancy toys and extreme training. They knew that the Marines were coming to kill them. My dad always told me that one of the greatest weapons our military has is the image that we conjure in the minds of our enemies. While it is one thing to fight someone who you feel is an equal or lesser match to you, it's a completely different scenario to fight someone who you truly feel is a monstrous force of war. I can't speak for the other branches strictly because I don't have a close personal relationship with someone who's enlisted, and I have never enlisted. However, I can tell you that my father and all of his Marine buddies are absolutely vicious if prodded in an aggressive situation. In Grenada, the Marines were only supposed to take the top 10% of the island and the Army the rest. The Marines landed and began their attack. At the end, the Marines held about 90% of the island and the Army the rest. The OPFOR were fleeing from the Marines to fight the Army. I'm actually former US Army. I spent an entire summer serving as an OPFOR opposing force at one of the Army elite training centers. Basically, I fought US soldiers in a giant simulation. I'd actually agreed to some extent with the pushover comments for some units. The US Army is just so damn massive, some units certainly will look completely incompetent. Also, outside of a few SOF units and light infantry, there isn't a whole lot of emphasis placed on toughness. However, combat arms units are no joke. We have the best, most expensive training in the world, and by far the best equipment. I would not want to be on the other team. Chances are I'd be dead before I even saw an American soldier. My great-grandfather talked to me about being a Canadian in World War II. When a Canadian plane flew overhead, the Germans dove for cover. When a German plane flew overhead, the Canadians dove for cover. When an American plane flew overhead, everybody dove for cover. This will probably be buried, but my great-uncle fought for the Germans in the Battle of Normandy. He said that they were told that the Allies were being pushed back into the sea and that any Allies they saw were most likely small units that had slipped by. A few days later, my great-uncle woke up to find a regiment of Americans camped within sight of the farmhouse they were in. Him and his squad surrendered. I have a girlfriend from Iraq who had brothers in the Iraq army. They defected pretty quick and live here now, but they tell me how insane the American arsenal was. While Iraq soldiers' main method of transport was pickup trucks, motorbikes, and bicycles, the Americans were transporting people in armored personnel carriers that were impossible to damage. Also tells me that the quality of training was noticeable, as you would never see the Americans, you would just be shot because they knew how to move from cover to cover and remain undetected. Her brothers never killed anyone. They defected once troops entered the country. They were only 16 at the time. Yeah, this is the closest I've got to an answer. My family is Panamanian. Being a civilian in a country invaded by US troops is terrifying. Tanks stopped in front of my grandma's house and started firing over it. My cousins were all really young when it happened, and they were absolutely terrified. Unfortunately, I don't have access to someone who may have fought for the dictator at the time that the US was ousting. From Iraq here. My father fought on the defensive lines in Iraq during the Gulf War, when the West forces entered Iraq. He said it was very scary to have planes fly over. You do not see them when they're coming because they're very fast, so damage and death happens with no warning. Planes were followed by soldiers, but he did not get close to them. He said everyone knew the fighting was pointless because Saddam was not a good leader, and he thought he was. Saddam thought he could fight back, but UN had better leaders and more tools. My father told me it was like fighting a bad disease because you don't know what you're fighting and you don't know how to fight it. Not the enemy, but was in communications, and we would get intel from counter-intel guys from intercepted cell phone calls. Talibans would be scared out of their minds when it came to engaging Marines. One report that I remember well was a commander ordering guys to engage in firefights because they wanted to do a show of force. The guy he was ordering gave a million excuses and was scared of the new Marines because they thought they were special forces. We had a bunch of new gear, chest rings, radios, and thermals. They ended up engaging a patrol later that week. We killed most of their cell that day. My great-uncle flew A6M0 Zeke fighter aircraft for the Japanese Imperial Navy. He survived one attack on an American carrier task force but was wounded and relegated to light duty in China. He described the first time seeing the US fleet circa 1944 as both awe-inspiring and extremely disheartening, simply the futility of trying to fight the US. I actually gave a talk on this topic today. Not just the US, but basically on the losing side. I suppose I'd sum it up. The winners write history. I guess the end result of facing an army like the US, a technological monster, is you're not going to be the one writing that history book. Currently in Berlin, and I just get my group, Australia, US, Canada, etc., to imagine no war memorials in their town, no Veterans Day, no Anzac Day, no parades, no walls listing the dead, and then I remind them for a large portion of soldiers here during World War I and II, it wasn't they were evil. It was they were, in their minds, fighting for their home the same as our grandfathers and great-grandfathers. We get to remember our dead soldiers, to raise them up as heroes. Those that lose don't. It's a strange but powerful thing to be allowed to remember. Massage therapists of Reddit, what are some of your most awkward or disgusting experiences with clients? Tell me all the weird crap you've dealt with. Then tell me if it's worth it making this career choice. My mother's been a massage therapist for over 20 years. She's in her 50s and she loves it. She massages a lot of elderly people and doesn't mind. She massages a few obese people and doesn't mind. To her, people are people, and she's not easily disgusted. But when people proposition her for sex, she minds. One particularly troubling encounter was when she was massaging a friend's husband and he thought it would be appropriate to ask for sexual favors. I hope she went and told her friend about that afterwards, cause I'm sure she'd want to know. I had a very eccentric client, which is a nice way of saying creepy. They came into our clinic one day wanting a tui na massage. It's a type of Chinese massage. We usually leave the room to let the client strip down into their underwear before we commence. But with this guy, I had no chance to get away. Before I had time to give him a towel, he dropped his pants to reveal a sparkling blue G-string that barely kept everything in place. The guy was about 58, huge beer gut, gray hair, gold earring, and hairy like Robin Williams. As I started the massage, the guy started to tell me that he worked as an erotic masseuse specializing in body slide massage. This is where the masseuse gets oiled up and rubs his body and genitals all over before screwing the client at the end. The whole time I was massaging him, he kept telling me that I was really good with my hands. He also repeatedly told me how he was good at his job and plugging his business with a hinting tone. It was a very awkward session. Yeah, not the kind of job offer you want while working. I was getting a massage last week, and in the little room next to mine, there was a talkative older gentleman. He was chatting away to his massage therapist. Then it went quiet. After a little while, I heard him whisper, Do you do this for everyone? A large female client wanted focus on her glutes. Needless to say, I was farted on while she was asleep. Her own fart woke her up, and then she accused me of farting because there were trace amounts of fart still in the air. I'm sure it wasn't pleasant at the time, but now you have a funny story to tell. I've had clients ask if they could massage me, specifically my butt, while I was working on them. One woman tried to put her face in my crotch and told me she would love to lick me. For the record, I was wearing yoga pants as I'm also a yoga instructor. Many people are surprised at how strong I am and comment on it and how small my hands are. That's not odd. What was odd was the guy who followed that observation with telling me that I also had moved like a wolverine. Not sure if that's a good or a bad thing. Former massage therapist here. I used to work in the YMCA in my hometown. There was a group of 4 older ladies around their early 50s that all played tennis together, and afterwards took turns getting massaged. At first, it was great. They were mostly doctors' wives, fairly easygoing and generous tippers to boot. But then things took a strange turn. One woman offered me a diamond tennis bracelet if I agreed to switch the order they were massaged in and did her first. I declined the gift but promised to use a rotating schedule in the future. She was fine at first, but slowly became more aggressive. She would beg and bribe me to extend her half hour for 10 or 15 minutes, in spite of her friends waiting. She constantly offered me expensive presents, shopping, home-cooked meals, all kinds of things I was uncomfortable accepting. The more I declined her offers, the weirder and edgier she seemed to get around me. Finally, I guess she got tired of beating around the bush and made an outright advance by grabbing my hand and forcing it onto her breast. I told her I was very flattered, but I wasn't interested in other women this way. She screamed, perfectly in range of all her friends and my coworkers to hear, about how I'd been leading her on for months, and how I didn't deserve any of her time and money. She berated my appearance and education before storming out the door naked and furious. I quit that day, started waiting tables, and never quite worked up the nerve to go back. Sounds like this woman was a little more invested in your relationship than you were. My mom is a massage therapist. She used to work out of our house. She had a studio downstairs where she would have people over for massages. One day, a woman who came over was probably in her late 60s. Oldish, slightly overweight woman. Now, my mom, as is standard procedure, asks this woman to disrobe and get under the covers while my mom waited outside. When she came back in after a few minutes after asking if the woman was done, the woman was standing in the middle of the room completely naked. The woman said, "Honey, I'm sure you've seen more than this in your day." She had not. That's not right. You're intentionally putting your masseuse in an uncomfortable situation. I'm sure they don't want to see any of their clients naked. I do it and I love it. I'm a guy, and I have to say there are some creepy phone calls, but that's about as bad as it gets. One guy asked exactly what kind of massage I did, which is a common precursor to do you do extras, and I clearly told him about Swedish massage. He said, "That's something my partner and I would be interested in," and asked, "And for the ladies, do you do sensual massage?" I find this euphemism so frustrating. It literally doesn't imply what they want to imply, but it's become recognized as a word for sexy time. I said no. He then said, "Could you?" I said, "No." Then follows a common awkward situation where we try and both pretend that he hasn't just asked me for some kind of sexual service in return for money, and finish the conversation as you might otherwise. This conversation and the time a rather lonely elderly gay man told me how much he appreciated having a pretty man take care of him were about the weirdest moments. Admittedly, when Mr. Lonely Gay Guy said that to me, I felt a bit gross, but also internally giggled, blushed, and said, "Aw, he thinks I'm pretty." For a fleeting moment, I considered a life as a wealthy boy toy of an aging thespian. My ticket into the high society of homosexual retirees. Feeling slightly jaded and ashamed of my life built on lies and sexual quid pro quo, but driven by the idea of inheriting his immaculate house and fortune. Then I remembered I was a bit far down the road of life for that change of tact, having married a woman, and I decided I would diminish and remain Galadriel in the West. But the weirdness is worth it. Swedish massage is a very fascinating practice based on Western medical understanding of human physiology. You'll learn words like desquamation and lymphatic. There are perks, like ladies paying you to touch their body. There is admittedly a slightly pervy pleasure when you're massaging someone really attractive, but it's seldom and balanced by your professionalism and the amount of slightly tubby men one deals with. And as a guy, I have a disproportionately high level of men, because women therapists won't see guys. It is great though, because men have more muscle, and that's the fun part for me. Getting deep into a thigh or shoulder and working the bits loose. It's truly the best job ever, though I often come home smelling like people. The absolute worst was a guy started touching himself while I was working on him. I have had one other guy proposition me, and one lady that was such a jerk that I ended the session because of what a jerk she was. I've been a therapist 5 years, and these are the only really awful things that have happened. Daily I help people. Daily I make people feel better. I'm sure that's the majority of the job. Of course there's going to be a couple of weird stories, given the field, but I'd like to think for the most part they get to do their job the way they want to do it. I'm just gonna say prolapsed uterus and they could have warned me, and leave it right there for you to imagine the gaps. I had to suffer this image being put into my head, so now you guys do too. I just graduated in April and I've seen some things. There was a guy that would come to the campus clinic to get a massage from the students. Well, one day his cyst popped. Warm pus flew 3 feet and hit the curtain. Smelled like death. Oh, and then there was the job interview where it was made clear that their distinguished clients would pay for a little extra. How about a big bowl of nope? I'm a massage therapist, doing medical type work. My clients are all super nice, so not many awkward experiences, but I'll share 2. The first one, I came back to change the sheets after one client had gotten dressed and left, and found that she'd had some diarrhea on my table. Luckily, our laundry service treats all of our linens as biohazards anyway, but yuck. And second, I came into the room after washing my hands and letting my client get undressed, and she realized she hadn't been specific enough about how she'd injured her back. So she got up, stark naked, and proceeded to demonstrate the motion she'd been doing when she hurt herself. I wasn't disgusted, bodies don't scare me, but I definitely felt awkward. That's about it. I love my job. I definitely suggest going into massage therapy if you're compassionate and can handle a good amount of physically demanding work. If you're worried about sexual come-ons, stick to medical settings. If you're worried about bodily fluids and/or smells, go the spa route. My brother is a massage therapist for a side income and has tons of horror stories. One of the strangest ones is a man came into their studio, he shared one with others, and specifically asks for a man. Well, he's left in the room with the typical instructions, undress and get under the sheet. And when my brother comes in, the guy is sitting on a couch, cross-legged, naked as the day he was born. Anyway, weirds out my brother, who apologizes and asks him again to get under the sheet and leaves for about 5 minutes. He comes back and begins the massage. Apparently, this guy had a huge penis tattooed on his back and kept hinting for more. The guy even started slightly pulling the sheet off his butt with his hands, and saying things like, "It's just the 2 of us in here. What happens here stays here. I wouldn't say anything." Basically, all of this unnerved my brother a good bit, who was all too happy when the guy's time was up. But, like a champ, he continued to do massages, although they did add that guy to their watch list. I can only imagine all the stories behind the people on that watch list. I worked as a receptionist for a massage service facility. Every masseuse was licensed and the business was legit, but I guess having an all-Asian staff gave creepers the idea that we provide extra services. One day, a rather large white man requested one of our longest massages, 2-hour Swedish massage. I instructed him to disrobe and lie beneath the bedsheets while his massage therapist prepared for the massage. Hand-wrist stretching, hydrating, that kind of thing. Typical procedure. He seemed like a decent guy, so I wasn't expecting any trouble until the masseuse that had just entered the service room stumbled out backwards shouting profanities and slamming the door. Apparently, he was sitting stark naked at the edge of the bed with his wang out, upright, and at full attention. To make it worse, according to the masseuse, when she walked in and gave him a startled look, he gave her the creepiest smile and jumped off the bed as if to approach her. We threatened to call the police and he left, though he had already paid for his service, so too bad for him. I've been doing massage for 10 years, have worked on several military bases, Sedona and Laughlin. You see some strange tattoos, some really interesting scars, some insane back hair, and smell some pretty nasty feet. If you like helping people and aren't into it for the money, especially in this economy, then it's definitely worth it. That's probably your general experience as a massage therapist. Not a whole lot of creepy stuff necessarily, just some kind of gross stuff. I'm a beauty therapist and do massage too. I once had a girl roughly the same age as me in her 20s come in for a body massage as a present from her boyfriend. Whilst doing the massage, I could see the oil looked weird, like a streaky brownish color, and it smelt weird. Well, the client smelt weird. After the massage, we chatted for a bit and she mentioned she'd spent the morning fake tanning herself. I looked at my hands and they looked like I'd just dipped them in chocolate. So brown. I then had to explain to her that it wasn't the best idea to do that as she'd now be one streaky mess. Tan fail. I know some girls have had creepy guys in for massages in the past, but luckily I haven't. Nothing exciting to tell, I'm afraid. Although, one girl had a guy in for a massage, and when she told him the massage was over, he offered her 21st special extras. She ran off crying. I was still in school and I was giving this guy a massage. Towards the end, he started shifting around a little and acting a bit awkward. I didn't think much of it and just went about finishing up. He'd said it was his first massage. As he exited the room, he got all shifty-eyed and awkward and seemed a little embarrassed. He didn't want to talk to me. He just paid as quickly as he could and got out of there. I went back to change the sheets and there was a nice little present sitting under the top sheet. A shining little glob. I didn't know what it was, though I had an idea, so I leaned in to sniff it just to be sure. Yup, it's what I thought it was. The worst part? He didn't even tip. He just left something from his tip. That jerk. Why on earth would you smell it? I had a woman that had explosive diarrhea during the treatment. I didn't know what to do, so I just ran out of the room. That's probably the best thing you could have done. Female therapist here, and surprisingly, nothing too creepy or weird so far. I had this one client while still in school who really wanted extra focus work on his toes of all things. After spending my time on his toes, he wanted glute work. He pulled his tight shorty shorts down and bared his hairy bum. Not exactly what I was expecting, being so innocent and new to the field. Needless to say, I pulled his britches right back up. Since then, I've had a few clients make sexual references or try to give me hugs afterwards. No blatant, here's my penis, you know what to do with it. There have been a lot of boners though. Every day, all day. All I see is a clock and boners. Alas, I do love my job. It's easy, but hard work at the same time. Very rewarding. I think it depends on where you work, what area of town, and who you're employed by. But I personally love what I do. Yeah, at the end of the day, if this is the field you're looking to get into, just be careful where you work and who you work with more than anything else. Assuming you're trying to avoid these situations. A client came in unable to fully stand upright due to low back pain. I told her that I would likely need to work in the hip area, so she should probably remove her underwear. She then said, "Oh, well, I had an accident earlier today and I threw away my panties so I would be more comfortable leaving my pants on." I did the massage anyway, although my coworkers were telling me to refuse to do it. But I felt like if you've already pooped your pants that day, you'd probably feel even worse if someone refused to touch you because of it. However, at the time, I was assuming that she'd actually cleaned herself post-liquid poop. I massaged her back and did compressions on her glutes and hamstrings with her pants on, all while the smell of excrement wafted in my face. Then I noticed at the end of the massage that she had brown stains along the cuff of her pants. She gave me a nice tip, but I had to thoroughly bleach the entire room and sanitize everything after she left. But nothing can sanitize my brain. Physical therapist here, but we do massages a lot. Here's a few quick ones. A girl on her period without a tampon or pad who stunk like heck from body odor messed up the towel we put out for the patients. Next, a woman in her late 40s. I sent her into the room and said that I would follow after taking a short break to get something to drink. Upon entering the room, I found her completely naked doing the sexy look. I turned around and left. In a clinic for chronic pain therapy, a woman accused me of sexual abuse because I didn't want to give her a happy ending. Luckily, she confessed to the psychologist that she made it up. A patient with a polytrauma and a fixature extern fled naked out of the 3rd floor. We didn't know how to manage this, or even why he was running. And many more stories I just can't remember right now or would take too long to explain. But even those bad stories can't take down the positive effects of the job. Grateful people everywhere. My sister is a massage therapist, and one day while working at a very nice upscale spa, she noticed that the guy she was working on would not stay still. He kept wriggling around on the table and she kept having to ask him if he was okay and comfortable. He said he was fine and she would continue, only to have it go on. Finally, the massage is over and she leaves the room to let him get dressed. She waits a few minutes, then knocks on the door to see if he wants water or if he's ready to go pay. He tells her he's done and to come on in, and she walks into him touching himself on her massage table. Apparently, he'd been grinding on the table / trying to get some friction / touch himself, or who knows, while she was working on him. She had taken a break from massage for a while, but she's now back working at the same place, and she's already had people ask her for a happy ending. Needless to say, she's not really crazy about the profession anymore. That's just it. I hate to say it, but at the end of the day, this kind of thing is gonna happen because there are creeps. If it's not something you can handle, then I don't blame you. Massage therapist here. There are some pretty unfortunate clients. Ones that smell, ones that are really fat, ones that are really skinny. Massaging bone is harder than massaging fat. Awkward ones, really hairy ones, horny ones who leave stains on the sheets. But my most off-putting types of clients are the ones, usually older, with lots of dead skin, that once you start to massage them and do the motions with your hands, their skin, combined with the oil or cream, makes for a disgusting mixture that sticks to your hands and onto their skin. And you're just smearing it everywhere, and trying to fling it aside so you can get through the rest of the hour. That's the worst for me. This wasn't even something I had considered until this point, but ugh. Male massage therapist here. Back when I was in school, I was doing a clinic at the school. It was a pretty chill scene. A lot of us developed regulars and got into a routine. My nights were Tuesday nights, and one day I came in and noticed I had a whole list of my regulars in, including this older man that had been coming to the school for years and getting massages. Every week since starting, he would request me. Now, the school says they can't always get you the massage therapist you want, but they'll try. Every week, like clockwork, he would be my last client. At first, he was nice and social. Then, over the weeks, his questions got extremely personal, and despite my trying to avoid personal questions, he would keep asking. As well, over time, every time I would get him to turn over, he would be packing a major rager. This was usually the point where questions got more personal. One night, I finally had enough, as he began asking if I would ever give a special ending for a large tip. I calmly declined and approached one of my instructors the next day. She just nodded her head and offered to change my night I worked. Kinda feel like it needs to be a little more addressed than that, but hey, at least she got you out of there. What's the most WTF thing you've experienced or seen during a flight? I travel quite a bit and have seen a few weird things, but on a recent trip from Vienna to Venice, things were taken to a whole new level. So we're about 20 minutes into the flight when I noticed that a woman sitting across from me had a Persian cat in one of those cat carrier bags. The plane was really warm and the cat was sitting in the bag panting. Well, the lady decided to let the cat out of the bag to let it cool off a bit. After trying to shove the cat's face up into the air vents for a minute, the cat literally freaked out. It was clawing at everything, attaching itself to the seats in front, jumping around, hissing, well, you name it. This thing went crazy. Anyway, after about 5 minutes of more of the same, the cat completely lost it, tried to climb the seat in front and, wait for it, fell over dead. We couldn't believe what had just happened. The owner was trying to shake the cat around a bit to wake it up, but it was a goner. For the duration of the flight, she was sat there holding her dead cat, sobbing quite profusely. That's just awful. I would be completely paranoid bringing a pet on a plane, and not because of anything like this happening, just in general. On a red-eye flight, just as I fell asleep, a woman passed out in the middle of the aisle and hit my leg. I was so doped up on Dramamine, I didn't even realize it and fell back asleep. The flight attendants put an oxygen tank on the floor and put the tank masks over her mouth. Apparently, they used my hand to hold it in place. So when I woke up a few minutes later, I was like, why am I holding an oxygen mask over someone's face? Hey, you're literally out there helping save lives in your sleep. I was on a Gulf Air, as in Persian Gulf, flight as a kid in the late 80s, and a Pakistani family a few rows behind me in coach lit up a barbecue. It was one of those little portable aluminum foil things. You never heard so many flight attendants scream so loud. Yeah, talk about different times. I walked onto the plane and gave the first steward I saw a bag of Hershey's miniatures. This is for the crew. The whole flight, I was given free headphones and all the free drinks I could handle. I tried to pay, but she just kept giving me my money back with every drink. Apparently, chocolate's very valuable in the air. I was about 15 and flirting with a cute girl in the seat next to me. My family was about 2 rows back, with my younger brother, and the lady that occupied the third seat pretty much set me up the entire flight. This old lady was the best wingman ever. Anyway, I get up to use the restroom and she says she has to go too. She gets out first and I'm waiting for her to finish up. We've been flirting pretty much the whole flight, and she knows that I'm right behind her in line. So she finishes using the bathroom and I walk in. Right there in the toilet is a gigantic unflushed poop. To this day, I have no idea how you respond to something like that. Not really a WTF moment, but kind of funny. So we're flying out of Cleveland and the pilot comes over the PA and gives his welcome, blah blah blah. So we're just leaving Cleveland, we should be in, And then slightly under his breath, but not quiet enough that everyone else didn't hear, he says, "Where the hell are we going?" Long pause. "Chicago." Everyone laughed. Good times and high times. I sat beside a Scientologist who tried to convince me to go into business with him. He wouldn't explain what the business was. How are you going to ask me to invest if you're not even going to tell me what I'm investing in? Come on, buddy. I was flying to Denver on Delta in winter 2009, and they were switching from cash to credit only. They just got their brand new machines to swipe cards, and I was one of the first people to test them out. I ordered a 7 and 7, and it was $7. She took my card, swiped it, and the thing that printed out was $0. I left a $3 tip and thought, cool. About 10 minutes later, she came by and asked if I wanted another. I said, sure, why not? I swiped the card, and another $0 transaction. Bought lunch, $0. So I ordered 4 more 7 and 7s and got hammered for around $20 in tips. I checked my bank account the day after and sure enough, only the tip showed up. I have no idea what happened, but that was one happy flight attendant. Sounds like you did pretty well for yourself too, my friend. A guy died next to me once. On a flight from Maui to Dallas, I was half asleep in the second to last row of the plane. While I was listening to music and dozing, I suddenly heard a really loud, hard thud next to me. I look over and there's a man lying on the ground, completely still. I thought maybe he tripped, but the flight attendant came running and he was unresponsive. She frantically ran up and down the aisles asking for doctors. Luckily for him, the flight was full of vacationing doctors and nurses. All of them in ridiculous clothes. 2 of the doctors who came back were in Hawaiian shirts and golf attire, and the female nurse who came back was wearing a very strappy, revealing blue Hawaiian print dress. The doctors tried to wake the man up, but he was gone. I was surprised to find out just how much medical equipment they have on commercial flights. The docs whipped out a portable defibrillator and shocked the guy, then set up an IV drip for him. I never heard a word out of him or saw him move. Not sure if he actually woke up or not. Our flight was diverted to LA, and when we landed, half a dozen EMT personnel ran onto the plane to pull the guy out on a gurney. Unfortunately for me, this scenario set off a panic attack, and I had to go find a nice spot in the aisle to lie down so that I didn't pass out and cause more problems for the crew and doctors. It was kind of embarrassing. One time, I was the only person on a very big plane from DC to Atlanta. They told me they wouldn't normally fly, but they really needed the plane in Atlanta first thing in the morning. I got great service, by the way. Since then, I've used this as the setting for an erotic fantasy. An older man unsuccessfully attempting to get some action from his wife in the seat in front of me. "Honey, I got the blanket in place." My wife was coming to visit me in Africa a few months ago. On some third world airline, a passenger sitting next to her pulls out his thing and starts peeing into a bottle, then hands it to the stewardess who didn't even bat an eye. I'm sorry, is there no bathroom on the plane? I was in an aisle seat on a flight from LA to Austin, Texas. About an hour into the flight, I noticed this awful smell. I look up from my book just in time to see this 70-year-old woman violently throwing up in her lap. Since I'm a sympathy vomiter, I turn towards the people in the other seats to try and avoid doing the same thing. After about a minute of this and the rancid smell of old people vomit, she's led to the bathroom. As she's leaving her seat, she poops herself in the seat. So I get to spend the rest of the flight gagging as this poop and vomit aroma assaults my nostrils. The flight attendants tried to clean it up as best as they could, but it made no real improvement. Ugh, that's awful to have to sit through, but also just kind of feel bad for that lady. She's obviously having a really rough time. While waiting to use the bathroom on the way to Panama, the door somehow opened while this guy was hunched over the toilet, pleasuring himself. At first, I couldn't believe what I actually saw. As his head turned to see the door come open, the most awkward eye contact moment of my life unfolded. He turned to shut the door in a panicked fashion, exposing his junk. At that point, my WTF face became encrusted into my facial features for the rest of the flight, and even the next day. Ever since that time, I can hardly use any bathroom on a plane. I was taking a business flight to Chicago when, about halfway through the flight, a man was walking back to the lavatory but completely passed out and hit the floor next to me. People started chattering and calling for help while this guy pops out of first class and says, "Don't worry, I'm a doctor," and addresses the situation like a boss. It was Dr. Oz. Oh, great. Is there any other doctor on board? On the way to Japan, I look across the aisle and see an old man sitting with an old woman I assume to be his wife. He reaches into his bag and pulls out a large stash of adult magazines and proceeds to sit and look at them for many hours of the flight. I'm sure he says he just reads them for the articles. I was flying Calgary to Houston, which is about a 4-hour direct flight. We were just about 2 hours into the flight, or coincidentally, just about to Denver, when the pilot announced we would have to turn back to Calgary. So around we go and land in about an hour 15. He really cranked it. We touch down and taxi over to the mechanics. They open the cargo door and shut it again. And in 15 more minutes, we were fueled up and in the air and off to Houston. This time it was about a 3-hour flight, full thrust the whole way. Luckily, there was an industry guy behind me and I overheard him speculating the reason. His idea was that since the airline had paid mechanics in Calgary and probably not in Denver, it would be cheaper for them to turn all the way around to Calgary than pay all the costs associated with landing in Denver. Luckily, it was just a little glitch and not a true problem, but it was anyone's guess the true issue. I have a friend that's familiar with the inner workings of the plane, and he said that anytime they open the cargo door and unplug a certain cable during maintenance, some switch has to be flipped to reset the alarm system for that door. He said it's an extremely common mistake for that switch to not get flipped after work has been done, and it results in false alarms. All that cost, likely in the tens of thousands, because one guy forgot to flip a switch. I'd be more annoyed at the waste of time, honestly. Just land in Denver, come on. On a flight a few weeks ago, the flight attendant started to make preparations for landing, telling people to put their trays up and whatnot. I noticed the flight attendant loudly speaking to a man in his late 20s or early 30s sitting 2 rows in front of me. "Sir, you need to put your seat back up. Sir, sir." The guy starts spitting blood and convulsing. It sounded like he was choking on the blood with each gasp of air. The flight attendant starts screaming for help and they make an announcement over the PA for a doctor. 4 passengers and all flight attendants leap into action. Turns out, the lady in the row between me and the sick man is a nurse. Together, they get him laid out in the row with his head in the aisle. He's not responding to their questions and he's fading in and out of consciousness. We make an emergency landing, 20 minutes ahead of schedule. As we're taxiing, he regains consciousness and tells the flight attendant holding his head that he's sorry for the trouble. We land, paramedics meet the plane and carry him off. He seemed to be stable, but I hope everything worked out for the guy. Yeah, that's gotta be a really scary moment for everyone around. Spitting blood and convulsing is not something that you want happening on a plane. This one happened to my cousin. He was flying in South America, and about halfway through the flight, he realizes he really needs to go to the bathroom. The plane he's on is a tiny prop plane made for tiny people. He's 6'5". He awkwardly climbs over his aisle mates and stumbles and shuffles to the back of the plane. As he's closing the door, the captain comes on the loudspeaker and warns of upcoming turbulence. He thinks, screw it, I really need to pee. He crams himself into this tiny bathroom and manages to whip it out. And right as he starts to pee, they hit a huge bit of turbulence that knocks him off his feet, backwards, through the bathroom door, and flat on his back in the aisle, still peeing straight up in the air. He was completely mortified and managed to get back up, pick up the door, and work himself back into the bathroom. He waited for like 20 minutes hoping no one would have seen it or that they would have forgotten about it by then, but when he went back out to take his seat, he got a standing ovation from every single person on the plane. Ouch. I feel like this story might be a little bit embellished, but I like the visuals here. I used to travel internationally a lot when I was younger and working for a telecom company designing new infrastructure. On one of the trips as we were heading to China, I looked out the window. We were above Alaska and bearing straight somewhere, and the horizon had a huge slice of black, like some weird wedge-shaped cloud that encompassed half the horizon. It was a bright day on the ground or sea below us. The ice was very bright and white, but there was this giant dark wedge encompassing and seeming to take over the earth as you looked out to the horizon. I had the guys next to me take a look out as well, and they were confused at first too. I was really confused for a few minutes. Then I realized what I was looking at in profile and what that black engulfing wedge really was. It was night. We were flying in such a manner that we were surfing the edge of daytime and nighttime at 35,000 feet. And at that moment, if you looked out over the horizon, you saw daytime fading into night. I only saw it that once. It was being in the right place at the right time. Aside from bad in-flight movies, that would be my most WTF experience. That sounds like that would be absolutely incredible to see. I'd love to see photos of something like that. I'm sure you could find it on Google. The bathroom sink on a Bangladeshi Airlines flight from Thailand to Nepal was clogged and had about 1,000 water bugs living in it. I was on a plane that lost power just as it was throttling up for takeoff. And I don't mean they reduced power to the engines. I mean all the lights went out, the engines shut down, and we were left sitting on the runway for a good few minutes. Somehow, the plane regained power and we taxied to an adjacent tarmac for another few minutes. After this, the pilot announces to the rest of the passengers that they had a small technical glitch and that we're now ready for takeoff. The rest of the ride was uneventful. I mean, yeah, you would want that to be the end of the events. You don't want that happening in the air. I was on a flight home from South Africa after a family vacation. My dad is diabetic, but he usually keeps his blood sugar levels pretty regulated, so I never worried before. Mid-flight, I wake up from a nap and see him slumped over the side of his seat. He was taken to the back of the plane where 3 doctors were examining him. They said his heartbeat went up to 220 or something, which I think means he was about an inch from death. All I remember is seeing my mom and brother break down. I began having flashes of life without my father, and it overwhelmed me. I felt sick to my stomach, imagining what life would be like, when all of a sudden his heart rate stabilized. The doctors on board said that it was a miracle, and I felt so much relief. The plane had to stop in Senegal where my dad was transferred to a hospital. He wanted me to keep going since the semester was starting soon. That flight home alone was terrible. I felt the other passengers watching me the entire time. He's all right now, but every time I get on a plane, I remember that feeling of leaving the whole world behind. I was on a flight from Amsterdam to New York one time, and there was this kid who was running up and down the aisles trying to bite people. As he was heading down the aisle at full speed, a stewardess suddenly pulled the refreshment cart into the aisle right in front of him, and he ran smack into it face first. She said to him, "Oh, sorry, didn't see you coming. You shouldn't run down the aisle like that," or something like that. I know she did that on purpose. It was awesome. Hey, you know what? Someone had to. I went to Vegas with my wife. First, let me say it was an early flight. We got there extra early for check-in, put our bags to the side so as not to get in anyone's way. This 300+ pound greaseball wearing a Hawaiian shirt and shorts comes waddling in with one carry-on bag, remember this as it's important, and knocks over my neatly stacked out-of-the-way baggage. It's also 15 degrees outside, freezing, and 5:15 in the morning. I'm like, whatever, no big deal. Later, we get on the plane. My wife has the window, I'm in the middle, and here comes too fat for the seat Hawaiian guy with his little bag to sit on the end next to me. Great. Believe me when I tell you, this guy smelled like a dead animal covered in throw up and poop. I literally dry heaved when he sat down next to me. The guy had a carry-on bag that he was clenching like it contained something of the utmost importance. Obviously not deodorant. And he was sweating through his thin red flowered shirt while everyone else was bundled in heavy winter jackets. We hadn't even taken off yet and I was becoming violently ill smelling this guy. I had to stuff my face in my sweater and throw my head into my wife's lap to try and escape the smell. After an hour, the guy became increasingly fidgety and paranoid. This made him sweat more. I can't figure out how a guy who sweated so much was so fat. He was like a walking sauna of used banana hammocks. Finally, the guy got up to use the bathroom, and as soon as he closed the bathroom door, people began ripping cologne and perfume ads out of magazines and rubbing them on his sweat-soaked chair. I kid you not. People were offering their apologies to me for having to sit next to him. And then the stewardess comes over and says, "I'm sorry, the flight is booked. There's nowhere else to put him." And I'm staring at her like, what? I never even said anything to anyone about it. That's when I realized this guy was such a disgusting mess. People were actually rallying around trying to help me. It was the weirdest moment of my life. For the next 5 hours, he made about 20 more trips to the bathroom, and each time, different rows would come over to rub his seat down with cologne. Oh, and guess what was in the bag? Adult magazines. Piles of adult magazines. He took a new one to the bathroom with him each time. I haven't been on a plane since. Yeah, that's gotta be just about the worst person you'd have to sit next to on an airplane. I was on a flight to Chicago. We were supposed to land at O'Hare, but about 30 minutes before landing, they told us it was too icy and we were diverted to Midway. The two are about 26 miles apart. So we land at Midway, we disembark, and as we're leaving the Skyway, a gate agent runs up and tells us we need to get back on the plane. They were now going to take us to O'Hare. We all said, screw it, we'll stay here. She then informed us our bags wouldn't be getting unloaded. We would need to go to the other airport to get them. So about 5 of us out of a full flight of 90 got back on and had to wait about 20 minutes to de-ice the plane, then a 15-minute flight to O'Hare. From the flyer's point of view, this just seems like a complete waste of time. I get that they must need the plane at that airport for something, but come on. Everyone's already deboarded, you got a few people left, just roll with it. The die has been cast. Not my story, but my sister's. She was once on a long-haul flight from London to Hong Kong. During the night, while everyone was sleeping, suddenly a woman let out the most blood-curdling scream. Since this wasn't long after 9/11, everyone was pretty on edge as it was. It turned out that the woman had just had a bad dream. Everyone was pretty annoyed after that. Hey, come on, it's not her fault. She has no control over that. I get that you guys would be annoyed, but come on, give her a break. Redditors who have caught their significant other cheating, how did you catch them? Did you give them another chance? We went to a Halloween party at a friend's place. I'd known she's had a bit of a crush on one guy who was to attend. At one point late in the night, she was quite drunk. She lined up at the washroom immediately after he went in. I kept a bit of an eye on her, and when the bathroom door opened, she went in, but he didn't come out. I stood at the door and waited. When it opened and he stumbled out, I immediately went in and confronted her about it. I'm proud of myself for not committing murder that night. We're going through divorce now. 10 years married with 2 kids. Really? You're gonna do it at a mutual friend's party in the bathroom? That's just got bad idea written all over it. I didn't catch him. He called me the next morning crying and told me everything. I respected his honesty, recognized his remorse, and truly believed it would never happen again. So I decided to forgive him. But after he cheated, he became incredibly paranoid. He started checking my phone, accusing me of revenge screwing people behind his back. Even got mad when I was assigned to work with a man on a group project in school. I couldn't stand by the fact that he was the one who cheated and I was the one being punished. I really had forgiven him. I wasn't holding his mistake over his head, and my attitude toward him didn't change after the fact at all, but he was driving me away more and more every day. After about a month of this, I broke up with him and he completely lost it. Sounds like this was a hitch in the relationship that you guys just weren't going to get through, one way or the other. I met my future husband when I was 15 years old. By the time I was 20, we were married, and I was pregnant with my first child. At 22, I gave birth to our second child, and that's when things changed. Suddenly, he was never home. He would leave the house to pick up milk and return at 5 a.m. He was drinking so heavily that most mornings he'd wake up in a panic, wondering where he'd left his car, only to find it in the driveway. Luckily, he'd never killed anyone driving home while blackout drunk. My husband had wanted to be a writer, so I would constantly find half-written stories or story outlines in these hardcover journals. He left them everywhere, and I'd pick them up and pile them on his desk. One night, I'm getting ready to host a party for my father's 50th birthday. The hall was already booked and I had already decorated. We were expecting about 80 guests. I was quickly trying to get ready and out the door as I had to be there before guests started arriving, but I could not find my pantyhose anywhere. While rummaging through our dresser drawers, I found them, along with another one of his hardcover journals. I opened it up and scanned a page wondering why this particular book was stashed in a drawer. As I read what was on the pages, my entire world was crashing down on me. Not only was my husband an alcoholic, he also had a pretty serious drug addiction. Then the worst part hit me. He was having an affair with my best friend. She was my maid of honor, my best friend since we were 10 years old. I ran to the washroom and threw up. I just couldn't handle the information I'd just gotten. I quickly finished getting ready and left the house. I hosted that party that night with both my husband and my best friend in attendance, and did so with a smile on my face. It was a tough night, but I survived. We've since gotten divorced, and I no longer have contact with either of them. Yeah, a lot of red flags there, unfortunately. Going out for milk and not coming back till 5 a.m.? I'm sorry, but I'm gonna need some answers. And the worst part is, he was cheating with your best friend. He was my first proper boyfriend, and in hindsight, he was a pretty crappy boyfriend. But at the time, I thought the sun shone out of his butt. So I was crushed when out of the blue, he dumped me, with no reason. A week later, a group of his friends who'd taken a liking to me contacted me with the real reason for our breakup, because apparently they'd seen what was happening and they were sick of his crap. Basically, he'd been seeing another girl behind my back, and when she found out about me, she refused to sleep with him. So he dumped me in the hopes of getting into her pants. She inevitably told him to get lost, at which point he tried getting back with me. I did not take him back. I found out while I was deployed. The guy she was cheating on me with emailed me and told me everything, every detail. He apologized and told me he had no idea we were together. I put a hole in the wall, went to smoke an entire pack at the smoke pit, went back to my laptop, and I thanked the guy. You gotta at least respect the guy for coming to you and letting you know. If he honestly didn't know she was with someone, at least he's doing what he can to try and make it right. My girlfriend was out with a friend, we'll call her Susan, on a girls' night until all hours, and told me she was staying at Susan's place for the night. The next time I see Susan, she pulled me aside and told me that they actually went to the house of a guy my girlfriend worked with. We'll call him Patrick, because that's his name. Susan goes on to tell me that she woke up in the middle of the night and found my girlfriend fooling around with Patrick on the couch, while Patrick's girlfriend was asleep in the bedroom. I thanked her for letting me know, then went home and told my girlfriend to pack her stuff. I kinda hope someone told Patrick's girlfriend too. The whole situation is messed up, but she was in the house. My ex-wife and I were together for 6 years, married for 2.5 of them. She worked in a hospital and started getting a little too buddy-buddy with a doctor. I confronted her about it and she assured me he was just a friend. and tried to make me sound crazy. She even had this idea in that she could convince or trick me into being friends with him so that she could be with him without me being suspicious. I did everything I could to get her to talk to me, but she never would. It's a very long, sad, and messed up tale. Eventually, all her lies started making less and less sense. I found a program that would decipher text messages and picture messages from an iTunes backup of her phone. It had all the evidence I needed. I still can't shake all the texts, images, and general disrespect of our marriage and family that I discovered. We have a 2-year-old together after all. This was a little over a year ago, and I still have serious bouts of depression over it. The day I found out, I texted the picture he had sent of his junk to both him and her. She came home sobbing and trying her best to convince me to try our marriage again. I could never trust her again, nor did I want to try, but for a while, I thought that maybe I should give it a chance. That was a waste of a couple months of my life. She refused to change jobs or stop contacting him, even with the threat of losing her family looming over her head. I made the hardest decision of my life, that it would be better for my daughter to grow up in 2 separate homes where she didn't need to witness her parents constantly fighting her in tears. I share 50-50 custody of her with my ex-wife, which saddens me deeply because I can't see her as much as I want, but it's better than her growing up in a household full of lies and deceit. Throughout the ordeal, I lost 30 pounds from constant stress and depression. I learned that people don't change. Selfish people will always be selfish people. I did, however, receive the amazing gift of a child from it all though, and I would never change that. That's really rough to hear, my friend. That's probably the worst part, is that when that trust is gone, it's almost impossible to get back. And it sounds like your wife wasn't really putting in any work to get there either. I was deployed in Iraq and my wife was being distant for a few weeks. During my deployment, she mentioned several times in phone calls this contractor she was working with and how much they click and all. I trusted her and never thought that she was cheating, but I joked about it and we laughed it off. I even met the guy while home on leave and he shook my hand, thanking me for my service. A month later, I'm back in Iraq, and one particular night I can't get a hold of her. I called and no answer. I'm very much a trust my gut type of guy, and I had a sinking, sickly feeling of something being up. I never was one of checking or sneaking into her accounts, but we shared passwords with each other. I decided to check her Facebook account. There was nothing in her inbox, but there was one lonely message in her outbox she didn't delete to the contractor guy she worked with, saying, "I will always love you." That was when my world came crashing down. Shortly afterwards, she finally calls me back, not knowing I know, and confesses she's pregnant with his baby. I couldn't get a hold of her because she was with her mom confessing what she had done. That night, I remember punching a wall and straining or broke my thumb, and leaving my barracks knocking over a porta potty. Thankfully, nobody was in it. There was a month or two before I was to be home, and we tried working it out being distant. Once I got home, I decided to give it another chance. She told me she would stop talking to him and request him to be removed from her project. I met her at the office one day for lunch, and she wasn't in her office yet. While waiting for her, I saw she had her email pulled up, but not her usual email. Turns out she had a secret email account with him. After that, I was done and out. The one thing some people don't know is that there can be layers to unravel when your significant other is cheating. My doubts started when I took my significant other's phone on accident, unlocked it, and bam, texts that were pretty inappropriate. I confronted her about it and she tried to talk her way out of it, but they were just texts, so I told her to stop doing it and everything would be fine. Unfortunately, I found out in a pretty annoying way. I was chilling at home and I get a message from a really good friend if I wanted to go play laser tag. We're in college and it's what bored college kids do. I decline and just go about my evening. The next day, I'm talking to that exact friend and he lets me know that my significant other and this other guy, the guy that she was sending the text to and that everyone else also knew, were being a little bit too close. I confronted her and bingo, she was cheating on me. Ended soon after that. A surprise visit from out of town. She's not home. Well, it was a surprise and I wasn't sure of her plans for the evening. So I go to my mom's house to wait a while. A few hours later, I go back to my girlfriend's apartment, but she's still not there. On a hunch, I drive by her male friend's place and sure enough, her car is there. I get an uncomfortable feeling about it, but try not to worry. So I go back to my mom's place to get some sleep. Up early, I go over to my girlfriend's again. Not there. Drive around the block, and she's still at that dude's place. I never liked that jerk. At this point, I'm angry. I go back to my mom's and call my girlfriend's home phone. The message was something like this: I came into town last night and we need to talk. A few hours later, she rings the doorbell and we go upstairs. She confesses that she cheated. I was in love with this woman, so I accepted her apology and gave her another chance. We stayed together for a few months, but I came to realize I couldn't forgive her so easily, especially since she was still hanging around that guy. So we broke up. The end. When they're caught and they're not willing to cut off contact with the person that they were caught with, there's definitely going to be problems. They can't seriously expect you to sit there and just be okay with you continuing to spend time with them. I'd been dating a guy for a few months. We didn't have a title on it, but a couple months before the incident, we had decided that we had no interest in seeing others and we were exclusive. He decides he wants to buy an iPad, and a few days later, I asked if I could see it to see what apps he had, and if there were any I might like to put on my own. I noticed an app called MeetMe that has around 5 or 6 notifications on it. I honestly had no idea what it was, so I opened it. It went straight to his inbox, which was full of messages from other women. Just as I saw that, he asked if I was ready to go to the grocery store, so I left it there. He could tell something was up at the grocery store, but I didn't bring it up in public, obviously. We get back to his place and I open up the app again. I said, "What's this app on here called MeetMe? I've never heard of that before." He said,
"Oh, it's just a social networking site, kind of like Facebook. It's really big with my friends from up in Oregon."
So I open up a message that says something like, "Hey girl, you want to come see me so I can play with those tatas?" Or something along those lines. I said, "Oh, so this blonde girl Shelly is gonna fly all the way from Oregon so you can play with her tatas? How sweet of her." Then we get into a huge fight, with him mostly claiming that I'm not his girlfriend so he can still do things with other girls, seemingly forgetting about the exclusivity talk. It ends with him confessing that he did it because he's in love with me and those strong feelings scared him, so he turned to other women, but he never actually met up with any of them. He also cried, so that was cool. I gave him another chance, but we crashed and burned not too long afterwards because I just couldn't trust that sketchy jerk. That's one of the worst, most popular excuses for cheating I've ever heard. It's just stupid when you think about it. The fact that people think that this is a legitimate excuse just shows how stupid they are. My ex just started grad school after being out of undergrad for about 2 years. We'd been going out for nearly a year. She would introduce me to a lot of her classmates and stuff, and we'd start to hang out with some of them. The people she had made the best friends with were guys, which I didn't have too much of a problem with. Most of them seemed cool. One of the guys she was probably the closest with, and she started talking about this guy all the time. He had just gotten married a couple months prior, I guess. I had met him a few times, and I got just a bit of a jerk vibe from him, but whatever. A couple weeks go by and she just starts to act different. It's our anniversary weekend and I have dinner plans for us. Get a nice card, all that kind of stuff. She has to cancel on me at the last minute because she has to study. That weekend, I stay at her apartment because I need to do something downtown the next day, and I wasn't living around there. She ended up having to go to her parents' house for some reason. She left her laptop and I took it to go on Gmail. Her Gmail was logged in, and I know I really shouldn't have done it, but I started to poke around just a little. I felt terrible while doing it, but I could feel some distance between us and she wouldn't talk to me about whatever it was. She had deleted the majority of her Gchat conversations, but must have overlooked one of them. It was a quite obscene conversation with that married guy about what they had done that weekend and many other times before that. So I took the card I had gotten for her, wrote "F you" all over the words, telling her how I had loved her, and set it on her computer with that conversation still open, and left. That's it? No follow-up? I guess she just came home and found that and put it all together and decided to let it go? My first boyfriend cheated on me with his ex at least twice, but I didn't actually find out until years after we broke up. He and I got together for drinks and to catch up, and I just flat out asked him if he'd slept with her. He couldn't answer me, and that answer was enough. Looking back, I knew in the back of my mind something was up, and I should have accepted that and moved on sooner. The paintings she did of him, the way he'd disappear for days after seeing her, heck, he even drove to my school in her car to tell me we should take a break. Ugh. It makes me angry to think about how naive I was. I was trying to be the cool girlfriend who didn't mind her boyfriend hanging out with his ex because they were just friends. Joke's on me, I guess. My ex-boyfriend and I had been dating for 2 years when he cheated on me. It was his birthday and we were supposed to be going out for dinner that night. I decided to surprise him with his birthday present earlier that day. I went over to his house since he was off from work and saw that he had left the door unlocked. So I went in and called out for him, but he didn't answer. His TV volume was turned up really loud, so I went up to his room just to catch him pile driving my cheer captain. There was no confrontation. I left quietly, though I did come back to stick nails in his tires out of spite. He begged me to forgive him, but I declined. I won't lie, I was tempted, but it really hurt. To give him everything, and I mean everything I could emotionally, and he was my first, for him to turn around and betray me like that really hurt. I will say that holding grudges did me no good. I was able to forgive him just for closure purposes. When it comes to forgiving someone for something like this, that's more what it's for. It's for you. You need to be able to move on, and it's hard to do that when you're still holding on to those feelings. My roommates in college confronted her after they knew she had someone over while I was out of town. She convinced them that she would tell me what had happened. After I returned and 24 hours passed, my roommates told me because they let her have her time. I kicked her out immediately and ended it. About a month later, she moved into the same building, same floor across the hall. Her door was about 8 feet from mine. It's a college town with tens of thousands of apartments. And no, it was not to see me. We talked once after the breakup, and it was truly over. That's incredibly awkward to have to be across the hall from each other after all of that. My wife had been acting distant for a few weeks, and suddenly started meeting a female friend of hers a night a week or so. I was suspicious, especially when the friend called looking for her on a night that they were supposed to be out together. A few nights later, I found some pictures and text messages on her phone. We argued, and I ended up going to my buddy's house at 3 in the morning. God bless him. The next day, we argued some more, and of course it was my fault. After all, I didn't pay her enough attention. We went to counseling, and I stayed because of our kids, but I've never forgiven her, and honestly, I wonder if staying was a mistake. The marriage was rocky once he met a girl in his summer session course and was studying with her while I was gone at work. Sometimes she'd come early in the morning, like 6 a.m., and then be there when I got home at 9 p.m. He would make her breakfast, lunch, and dinner with the groceries I was buying for us with my hard-earned money. I put my foot down and said that he had to limit his time with her, that my needs weren't being met. He was withholding sex for weeks at the time, citing that he was too tired or stressed. He said I was overreacting, that nothing was happening between them, and that I was just trying to sabotage his career goals. I read his chats with her, and he was pouring his heart out about our troubles, but there was no evidence of cheating. I sent him to sleep on the futon the day I came home from work to have lunch and found them boxing in the backyard shirtless. In the following months, I tolerated none of his crap. But what really got me was when I happened upon a pros and cons list comparing me to his ex, his study buddy, and some other girl I hadn't even heard of yet. I also found love letter drafts to 2 girls thrown in the trash, not even hidden. Needless to say, I ended it right quick and kicked him out. I was actually pretty merciful and let him live in the garage for 3 weeks, but he definitely didn't deserve it. Last I heard, he's dating the 3rd girl on the list and living with his study buddy. Jerk. This sounds like it has nothing to do with you and more with him just not knowing what he wants. Sadly, a lot of the times that's the way it goes. It's not the person who got cheated on that has anything wrong with them. It's the person who did the cheating. What's the worst thing you've had or seen done by someone who was supposed to be a professional? Dentists will appreciate this one. My girlfriend at the time was unhappy with the appearance of her teeth, and rather than go with orthodontics, which my very professional dentist had recommended, opted to go the instant solution of crowns and veneers. nearly a dozen in all, suggested by a dentist at some random strip mall. Doing this work required she get 6 root canals. Her appointment for the work was a Friday at about 2 p.m. They worked on her for 3 hours, and when it was 5 p.m., it was quitting time. They stopped work, put a temporary bridge on her, and said they'd see her in 2 weeks, when her next appointment was scheduled, and sent her home. Once the lidocaine wore off, she was in agonizing pain. By Sunday, she literally asked me to kill her. Calls to the dentist service went unreturned. Monday morning, she called and was told the pain was normal and they wouldn't see her earlier. That afternoon, I called my dentist, explained the situation, and brought her in immediately. He gave her some lidocaine, which provided instant relief, and then took the temporary bridge off. Next, he said out loud, "Holy crap!" and told his assistant to get the camera and took about 50 pictures. He left and went into his office and then came back, put the temp on, gave her a script for Percocet, and told us to call her dentist again and make an appointment. We did it, and it was scheduled for 7 a.m. the next morning. Apparently, they had started 6 root canals on Friday, but not completed any of them. Just opened the tooth and exposed the nerve, but not actually destroyed it, and left the tooth open with minimal packing and no actual filling. And apparently, they expected my girlfriend to live with that for 2 weeks with no pain meds. I talked to my dentist about it at a later date, and according to him, this was about the single most painful thing a dentist could do to a person. And had they not taken the appointment the next morning, he was going to hand the pics over to the state's ethics review board. That sounds so painful. Thank God you guys were able to get her in to see your dentist quickly. Let this be a fair warning to anyone who's trying to save a buck on their dentist. Had a gynecologist cough straight into my, didn't cover her mouth, didn't turn away, just spread my legs and coughed. My girlfriend's parents saved money on their room addition by hiring a handyman to install the bathroom fixtures instead of a plumber. He mixed up the hot and cold pipes. It's really odd to sit on a toilet full of hot water feeling the steam rise on your butt. I'm sure that's weird at first, but I can see how that would grow on you. I had a teacher in college that took points off my essay for misspelling ludicrous. She didn't know it was a real word and thought I was referring to a pop artist. Had a professor lose my final exam. When I emailed him about why I was failing, he said, "Well, you should have been there for the test." After trying to convince him I was and him not believing me, I showed up to his office and demanded he allow me to go through the Scantrons. He threw a pile at me and rolled his eyes, thinking I was using this as a last resort. Nope. Almost 1,200 Scantrons later, I pulled mine out and put it on his desk. I made him run it through the machine as I watched. Granted, I understand that he had a lot of students and sometimes Scantrons get misplaced, but he shouldn't have been so disbelieving and rude over it. The thing is, I'm sure he has lazy people try and pull moves like this all the time, and probably just didn't want to go through 1,200 Scantrons himself. A doctor once prescribed me beta blockers to treat anxiety. On my follow-up appointment, I asked him about one of the side effects. He asked me what drug I was on. I explained it was the one he had prescribed me the week before, and told him the name of it. The dude proceeds to open a book of prescription drug information and tell me I probably shouldn't be taking it because it could be dangerous. I haven't been back. Maybe look into that kind of thing before prescribing the medication. I had wrecked my mountain bike on a South Mountain trail and ripped open my arm pretty good. I also broke 2 rims, cracked my helmet, and blew out my front shock. I was in and out of consciousness on the road to urgent care. Because it was early Sunday morning, the first 2 places we went to were closed, and we ended up at a little clinic. This young doctor, 3 years out of med school, cleaned my wound, pulled all the rock and dirt out of my skin, and then stitched up a large flap of skin that was torn back. He gave me 2 pain pills and told me to have a good day. Well, apparently you aren't supposed to stitch wounds up like that, and are supposed to let them drain or breathe. I went in 2 days later to get more pain pills because my arm hurt so bad it was keeping me up at night. The doctor on staff told me I had to be admitted to a hospital with an ER immediately, because my whole arm was infected and it was starting to reach my lungs. I had a massive infection that ended up hospitalizing me for days, and then I had to have a surgery where they removed a good part of my forearm tissue to let it all regrow. I spent more than a month packing and cleaning out a dollar-sized wound as my tissue regrew. Worst experience of my life. Unfortunately, there's always someone who graduated at the bottom of the class. Professional roofer didn't seal the roof off properly at the end of the day. It rained that night and my parents' attic was filled with water. I'm from Spain and my parents are from Spain as well. I speak Spanish without any accent, not even a local accent. I speak like people on national TV. I'm white. There's no reason for anyone to think I'm a foreigner, but I have a French first name followed by the two most common Spanish last names. So I had a consultation with a psychologist. She had my medical history before the consultation. The first thing she asked was if I was having a hard time adapting to the country. I told her I'd always lived here, but I had a French name because my mom moved to Switzerland when she was 18 and moved back to Spain to give birth to me, so she was used to French names. So she asked me if my parents were having a hard time adapting to the country. I told her that my parents were Spaniards who had briefly spent time in Switzerland 25 years ago. Then she asked me again if I was finding Spain very different from my home country. At this point, I started getting irritated, but went along with it because I wanted psychiatric treatment, and she was the one who had to refer me. During the 45-minute session, she asked me several times if I was having a hard time adapting, and made numerous references to my status as an immigrant. To this day, I still don't know if she was crazy, on drugs, or just not listening to me. Probably the last option, unfortunately. For a profession that's supposed to be very good listeners, a lot of the times they don't do it so well. A sign language interpreter was working in a classroom. She only had one deaf customer. So instead of doing her work, conveying the message between spoken and sign language, she flirted the entire time with the guy who was sitting next to the deaf student. When I was working for an oil change place, I witnessed the manager of 15 years not put the oil in the car and send it on its way. I was working in the pit at a 2-bay store. While I was changing the diff, fluid on another car, waiting for the oil to drain, the manager did this without checking to see if it was ready. I didn't even get to put the plug back in. What are you doing? It wasn't even ready to put oil in it. The plug is still here. Oh, I thought you were done. You didn't even check if I was done. We found out later that he had just started a new hobby and was fired shortly after. My wife went to a professional conference out of town when she was 7 months pregnant with our first child. It was about a 4-hour drive from home and she was a little concerned, so she asked me to go with her. She didn't consult with her OBGYN. While we were there, her water broke. We went to the local hospital and they said she was going to be bedridden for the next several weeks, so unless we wanted to stay there, we should get in the car and drive like heck back to our hometown. When we got home, we went directly to the hospital and they admitted her. They kept her in a bed with her feet higher than her head and checked her several times a day for infections. Her OBGYN was nowhere to be found. My wife was a registered nurse at the same hospital where she was staying. Her friends, the other nurses, would come by and chat with her frequently. They let her know that the OBGYN was mad at her for leaving town without telling him and complaining to everyone in the hospital about her. After she'd been there for a couple weeks, the OBGYN showed up. I was in the room along with several of her friends. He smelled very strongly of alcohol. He walked up to the bed without saying anything while putting on a glove. He pulled up her gown and jammed his hand in while everyone was standing there. He then made a few incomprehensible sounds and stormed out. We didn't see him again for a couple weeks. The test for infection finally came back positive, so they were going to induce labor. Her OBGYN showed up, and even though the staff doctors said she could deliver normally, her doctor insisted that she needed a C-section. My wife was really disappointed, but we went along with what he said. We later found out he wanted her to have a C-section because he had a tea time that afternoon and didn't want to miss it. I wanted to complain, but he was the head of the department at the hospital, and my wife said there would be repercussions to her job if we did. This guy just sounds like the worst. When he's acting like that, who cares what he says anymore? Just do what you think is right. If you want to listen to the other doctors, then do that. When I was a teenager, I ended up having to have my first root canal at a new dentist because my father had switched insurance plans. Everything started out normal, but after about an hour into the procedure, the dentist told me that she needed to step out for a moment. At that moment, I still had one of those metal filing toothpicks stuck up into my tooth, so she told me not to close my mouth. I sat there with it open for over an hour. Apparently, she had gone off to do a procedure on another patient because my root canal had run over the time she had allotted for it. Surprise, surprise, my tooth had somehow become infected in this time, and I had to wear a temporary crown for a week and not eat anything that wasn't room temperature while I took antibiotics. When I finally got the permanent crown, it ended up being the brightest shade of white they had. I still haven't been able to get my other teeth to match it without professional whitening. It should be mentioned that this lovely dentist was Orly Tights, the lawyer-dentist who later went on to become the head of the Obama birther movement. I was a little surprised when I ended up seeing her on CNN. An electrician touching exposed wiring to see if it was on. I should also mention that he only had 3 fingers left on that hand. I once saw a professional fire dancer use a fire whip and accidentally set his own hair on fire. He proceeded to flip the heck out. I'm sure that one's just a hazard of the job. One of my history teachers in high school was a complete jerk. He looked like the villain from Air Bud. Red hair, Charlie Brown bulb of hair in the front with a mustache. He had done things like try to rip my papers apart when I stapled the wrong 2 together, ripped one in half and made me tape it back together. I completely hated the guy. One day, he brought his daughter to school and she wasn't acting the way he wanted. He locked her in the closet in the classroom. The entire school heard about it. Sounds like Child Protective Services might need to hear about it too. When I was around 14 or 15, we moved into a new apartment and I made a new friend. She was around my age and we hung out all the time. We would walk to the corner store a lot and she would go in the back room for lengths of time as I waited. I always wondered what she would do in the back room, but she would change the subject and I didn't worry too much since she wouldn't get in trouble and she was the only friend I had at the time, considering it was summer and I had just moved. Later, I saw her coming out with a cop. She didn't know I was in the store. When she saw me, she told me everything and told me not to tell anyone. Story is, she'd been sleeping with this cop for the past 3 months. He worked security at the convenience store part-time. He was an actual police officer. I stayed quiet but couldn't believe how someone that was there to protect us was sleeping with a 14 or 15-year-old in the back of a store. Also, how the owners allowed it and looked the other way. Worst part is he became really good friends with her mom. She never suspected a thing. He used his uniform to earn trust and abuse his power. She said she was in love with him. I stopped hanging out with her so much and we moved a couple months later. I was taking some long-distance courses in order to complete my university degree. One particular class was an economics class. The professor for that semester was filling in for the regular, and had never taught long distance before and was using the regular professor's materials. No big deal, it's really not that hard. So midterms roll around. We write the multiple choice midterm and our proctors mail it back to them. Being as there are people across the country and often in other countries taking the course, the tests take a while to come back and be graded. Cool, no problem. So one day we log into the online courseware and see that our grades are posted, along with a very long and ranty email from the professor. The entire class failed the midterm. She insisted that she double and triple checked the answer key, and that it was right, and that she never had such a thing happen before. She also admonished us for not studying hard enough, and that we really had to work to pass the final. As you can imagine, there was nothing but uproar amongst the class. No one could believe that not even one person passed the midterm. So we waited for the midterms to be returned to us. Along the way, she decided to compromise and offer us a very fair final, doubling all the midterm marks so they were where they should be and to use the better mark between the two for the course grade, as long as the final was passed. Now it's 3 weeks before the final and everyone is flipping out to ensure we completely understand the material. Online study groups are created with questions and discussions abound. Then midterms began arriving back at students' homes. We began posting questions about the answers. Why was X wrong for question A? The professor gave very lengthy and detailed answers for the first few that had been posted. We were confused. The answers that she had given us were to questions that weren't on our midterms. The professor went silent. After berating us for being idiots and insisting it wasn't her fault, the professor profusely apologized for inadvertently correcting all the exams using the answer key for a different version of the exam. Had a locksmith try and fix an atrium door we have in our house. Something in the deadbolt mechanism broke and it refused to retract. This guy came in and couldn't get the lock apart. That is to say, he couldn't figure out how to get the bolts out and tried to get the faceplate off with a pry bar. Then he decided he needed to take the slab out of the opening, except the hinges were tamper-proof. So once the pins were out, he still couldn't get the door out. He tried prying the crap out of the hinges with another larger pry bar, damaging the door in the process. The next day, I was able to get the bolts out and got the door open myself. What the heck, dude? Maybe it was just his first day. Let me just start by saying I've had a peanut and nut allergy since infancy. When I was in preschool, there was a day that they were serving PB&J sandwiches. Me, being the smart little squeaker I was, called attention to the fact that I can't eat PB&J because I'm allergic to peanuts. One of my teachers came over to me, grabbed my sandwich, opened it up, and wiped the side with mostly peanut butter against the edge of a table and put it back together and gave it to me. I gave her a dead, confused, and repulsed stare, followed by a courteous, "Can I have something else, please?" The girl then fetched me broccoli and cheddar soup, and I ate that instead with pride. Later, of course, I told my mother, who rose up all hell. I mean, seriously, what the heck? Not only should my teachers have known about my allergies, but they should have had the sense to know that even the smallest amount of peanut butter will still in fact cause an allergic reaction. I had an electrician who claimed he could do network cabling. Added 3 network points the same way you added power sockets, by running a spur from one existing network point. The result? 4 network points in the office, perfect in every way except that you could only use one at a time. I don't think that's the result you wanted. When I was 6, I was sent to a therapist for ADHD. He decided to give me 11 different medications over the course of a few months. They made me appear to be completely insane. My behavior became strange and violent. My parents eventually made me a day patient at the local asylum because they caught me talking to things that weren't there. Thankfully, the therapist there got me off the cocktail and told my parents to sue the original therapist. I still remember the nightmares and hallucinations that would blend together. Let this be a lesson to always get a second opinion. After some severe bleeding, I went to the ER to see if maybe I'd had a miscarriage. Up till this point, there hadn't been any reason to think I may have been pregnant. The doctor ran a test and came back to tell me, "Congratulations, you're fertile, Myrtle, and yes, it miscarried." When I was a teen, I went to the ER because I had been bit by a cat. The doctor told me I should take antibiotics and asked what kind I wanted. To clarify, I'm not a doctor, nor was I one at age 13. I told the psych doctor in a mental facility that I had mood swings sometimes, but that they were always caused by something and were not random. Then he asked me if I ever saw or heard things. I said, aside from 2 or 3 of those minor, unreal images we all have when we're trying to wake up, nothing really. That was probably the wrong thing to say, because then he diagnosed me with having schizoaffective disorder. It tore my parents apart, and I had to explain to them several times that this guy was full of crap and blowing things out of proportion. Fortunately, my next doctor wasn't so quick to rush to judgment. My coworker doesn't know how to transfer calls. She just tells people to hang up and call us again and ask the receptionist for someone else. I feel like we all have that one coworker, right? In 4th grade, I hurt my ankle during recess and told my teacher I thought it was broken. I mean, my ankle had swelled to the size of an orange. Of course, the teacher dismissed me and had me go to the nurse, who said it was just a little sprain. I walked home that day, 8 blocks, with a shattered ankle. When I got home, I showed my mom and we went to the ER and I had to wear a cast for 8 weeks. Thanks, Teach. I work as a summer rec director for the local school district, so I basically spent my days watching 30 children of various ages run around a playground and get into trouble. Now, some of these kids have special needs, and in that case may have an aide to help keep an eye on them. One day, some boys around 10 found a hornet's nest in the ground, and unknown to me, decided to poke it with a stick. This understandably ticked off the bees, so they started to swarm around the area. I realized and started to warn the kids to stay away. While I did, a boy named Tim with autism started wandering over, oblivious to the problem in my shouts. His aide just stood there and watched him do it. I ran across the park, grabbed him, and carried him away, slapping the bees the whole time. He got stung 5 times, twice in the face. The aide said she had a phobia of bees and didn't want to get too close. I'm sorry, but it's your job. You gotta take one for the team there. You grab the kid and you run. I'm sure you have a phobia of being hit by cars too. You wouldn't just let him walk into the street. I applied for an apartment at a nice apartment complex in my town, and several months later, I got a phone call about a maxed out credit card I didn't own. As it turns out, the guy who processed credit checks was opening credit cards with the info on rental applications and maxing them out. He was genuinely surprised when he got caught. According to the arresting officer, he had over 50 stolen cards when they arrested him. I had a situation like this happen at a place where I once worked where you could open a credit card in the store. One of the employees had a thing going where he was filling out fake applications and getting credit cards under other people's names. I remember the day the police came in and walked him out in handcuffs. You're always going to get caught doing something like that eventually. When working in a salon, this one girl would burn women on purpose with a curling iron if they annoyed her. She didn't last long. Bad attitude won't get you far. Well, yeah, you can't have an employee who's assaulting the customers. For the teachers out there, what are some stories about horrible parents you've had to deal with? I have a student who, while out on the playground, slapped another kid in the face. He was obviously taken into the office where the student then claimed that the wind blew his hand and that's what caused the slapping action. But it wasn't actually him. It was just the wind. It was a nice, sunny, mildly breezy day. Not at all possible. The student was in the office for physical aggression towards another student and looking at a one-day in-school suspension. Clearly not his first offense. The principal calls home per the standard protocol in our district, and the parents believed his story, so much so that the parents actually came in with a lawyer to meet with the principal, and to get all the charges dropped. Despite 2 noon aides and a kid with a nice red mark on his face, this student was sitting back in my classroom in the afternoon getting off completely for a blatant attack on another student. I feel like all he learned from this experience is that he can do whatever he wants, and his parents will let him get away with it to the best of their ability. These parents actually dragged their lawyer into the principal's office? Come on. A student of mine, first grade, came to school every day without a jacket, and when asked about it, he told me his jacket was too small and his family couldn't afford a bigger one. When winter came around, I raided the closet in the front office for a donated jacket for him. He lucked out, and there was a brand new jacket with matching hat and mittens in there, so I put them in a box I had laying around and tucked them into his backpack. They were a little big, so I hoped he'd grow into them. I told him there was a present for him in his backpack, but to wait until he got home to open it, as to not leave him vulnerable to questions and taunting from his classmates. The next day was warmer, so I wasn't shocked to see him without the coat. However, what was shocking was that his mother showed up at pickup in the family's SUV wearing that jacket. I had to have a talk with the poor guy and arrange for a recess jacket for him that he left in his cubby so his mom wouldn't take another one. You know, most decent parents would put their kids first and not steal the clothing off their back. My mom is a kindergarten teacher, and she had this one terrible student who not only kicked her in the face while she was helping him with his work, but he actually stole her digital camera from her desk drawer. She keeps it at work to take pictures of kids' projects and events and stuff to share with parents. His parents suggested that my mom shouldn't bend down to help students lest she be within kicking range, and to leave her valuables at home. I have a feeling we're going to have a lot of stories like this where parents are just raising little monsters. I don't think I have any worst stories, but I mostly notice a lot of trends. Parents are starting to tell teachers not to bother them with details about their child's education. For example, little Johnny's failing. Why are you calling me about that? I also notice quite a large number of parents who don't try to discipline their children at all. I had a student who was doing poorly and was always falling asleep in class. I called the father to talk and notify him about the marks, and to suggest that maybe he needed more sleep. The father said, "What am I supposed to do about that?" It's actually quite a common statement. The parents that bothered me the most were the parents of a boy with special needs. Every day they sent him the same lunch, macaroni with nothing on it. I asked them at the first conference why they did this, and his mom said, "It's not like he'll notice." It was sad because he really did notice. When we had special lunch days, he would get so excited about hot dogs or pizza. It's indicative of how well they treated him overall, and they didn't try to engage or stimulate him. I was one of 4 teachers in a conference with Dee's mother and a school counselor. I was the last of the teachers to talk, but I said much the same as the other teachers. Dee skips class all the time, yells out constantly, never does his work, and regularly calls you over to ask questions before farting. Dee was awful. Who behaves like that in 10th grade? Anyway, after all 4 of the teachers said essentially the same thing, Dee's mom looked at the counselor and asked, "I don't understand why all these teachers are lying about my son." Dee's 2 older brothers were in jail. I assume Dee followed in their footsteps. Sounds like this lady's just clueless. Not from a classroom, but I had this one parent of a kid in my Girl Guide unit who was just awful. When we first met her kid, she would always ask questions about everything, didn't listen to instructions, and would then ask questions about everything she missed, and was generally clueless. Then we met her mother, and it all made sense. The first time we met her, she tried to sell us life insurance. That was her job. And in the first 5 minutes of talking to her, she started about 4 topics, yet never finished any of them. She drove around in an uninsured car, the irony, and would often offer to pick up or drop off other people's kids as well. She was also always late for everything. Last to drop off, last to pick up. Here's where the story gets even worse. I guess she used to homeschool her kids, which is scary to think about. In grade 1, she put her kid in public school. Every time she had a problem with the school her kid attended, she pulled her kid from the school and moved her to another school. It got to the point where the kid had gone to 4 different schools in less than a year. Her learning was severely behind, and it was hard for her to make and keep friends. I feel so sorry for whatever poor teachers had to deal with this mom. I was a humanities teacher briefly, and I had a meeting with the mother of a boy due to his ongoing behavior problems in class. Bright kid, very creative, just couldn't stop distracting some of his classmates. No biggie, really. Mom brought our meeting to a premature end by announcing, "Readings for homosexuals," and storming out of the room, yanking her kid along behind her. Poor kid never had a chance. Not a teacher, technically, I'm a juvenile counselor. But on Monday, I saw a kid who was brought in by her aunt and uncle. Dad was in jail and mom was a junkie. I kept trying to help them come up with rewards for good behavior, like trips to the zoo, family picnic, an hour of outside playtime with the kid, and they just kept saying how no one likes her and how she hates everything. Worst was, when I was asking the kid what happens when you steal, that was her crime, she said, "You get abandoned." Ugh, that one will hit you right in the gut, won't it? One of my best friends is a French teacher who came from France and became an American citizen. He's white and after living here for about 5 years, got a job in a majority black school. After he taught there for a few months, a mom decided to play the race card, came storming into his classroom and said her daughter said he was the biggest racist she'd ever seen, then threatened to get him fired. He let her rant and rave in front of the class, and when she finally paused for a breath, he turned around his wedding picture. He's married to a black woman. He said her mouth dropped open, but no sound came out, and she kinda slunk out of the classroom. His kids were crying, they were laughing so hard. My mom is a special ed teacher. She had a parent-teacher meeting with the parents of a severely disturbed young man with multiple problems. During the conference, the mother casually asked, "I'm not really sure, but do you think that maybe the reason my son has so many problems is because I smoked meth every day while I was pregnant with him?" The whole room was in stunned silence for about 30 seconds before my mom piped up with, yes. I agree. That's probably the reason. Most laughable experience I've had was with a plagiarism case. Kid had ripped his entire essay off the internet. I'd googled a few sentences from his assignment and found the page where he got the stuff from and printed it out so the kid could see that the two copies were word for word. He aggressively denied it, so we got his mom in for an interview. I showed her the submitted assignment and the webpage printout, and her answer was that her dopey 15-year-old boy had actually written the Wikipedia entry on the Treaty of Versailles, so it wasn't plagiarism at all. Nothing like supportive parents. I teach at a dance studio, and last week some of my 2-year-olds just kept biting their arms for unknown reasons. When class was over, I let the moms know, and one of them looked at me and went, "She would never!" My mouth kind of dropped as I tried to gather words, and she quickly said, "No, I'm just kidding. I just wanted to see what it would be like to be one of those parents for a second." She scared the crap out of me for a minute there. If I become a parent, I'm gonna do this at least once. I've had my fair share of parental horror stories, as it seems most of us teachers have had, but I think it's time for a pick-me-up. I teach digital arts and technology at an inner-city public high school in a gang-infested, poverty-ridden, but culturally bright neighborhood. Last year, a student of mine, let's call him A, stole a MacBook laptop out of my classroom. After scouring video footage in detail, I identified the student who took it. The kid lied repeatedly to me about not taking it, and security couldn't find it on him or anywhere else at all. After escaping security, A picked up the laptop from another student, who he planted the laptop on earlier in the day, took it home, painstakingly cleaned the white keyboard and casing with a Q-tip, then promptly sold it to some dudes on the street for $500 cash. 2 days later, a random girl tells me about how A planted the laptop on the random kid. The accomplice admits, security calls A back in, and gets his father into the school. Dad is furious with A. He takes A into their car and makes A drive through the streets of the hood to find the dudes he sold the laptop to. Dad forces A to buy the laptop back from the guys he sold it to for a markup price of $600, which A paid. The next morning, Dad makes A return the laptop back to my classroom in better condition than when he stole it. Not one file missing and sparkling white MacBook. There's hope for us yet. We had to squeeze in at least one good parent, right? My stepfather was having parent-teacher conferences, and he was talking to this kid's parents. The parents had a question about when my stepfather was going to go over the Civil War. My stepfather said it would be in about a week or so. The parents said, "Great, because we'll pull our kid from the unit. We believe the Civil War never happened, and we're under the Confederate government." My stepfather was flabbergasted and didn't know how to respond. Then the parents got up and said to him, "We'll also pull our kid for the World War II unit because the Holocaust was made up and never happened." Some people just love to believe what they want to believe, don't they? I could list all the terrible phone calls, conferences, and emails where parents blame everything except their child's actions for the reason they're in trouble. They're so numerous, I can't even begin to count them. The one that's different than all of those, and the only one like it that I've encountered, was one with one of my AP English students. It was a typical parent-teacher conference. AP parents were flying in and out, since almost all the kids are doing well. This one super sweet girl and her mother come in and sit down. I tell them she is a 99% in the class. 99% total, as in an A+. Without missing a beat, the mom looks at her daughter with big time attitude and says, "What can we do to get that to 100? My mouth dropped. I said, "Well, we still have a semester, so there's time for extra credit." And then I made a mistake of adding, "But you know a 99 is really great." That was a mistake. The mom jumps out of her chair and starts yelling at me that I should mind my own business, and that she has high expectations of her daughter to become more than just a high school teacher. I hate parents, which is why I don't plan on ever becoming one. This mom needs a reality check. Her daughter's doing great. You have no need to be so hard on her. No worse story, but after 25 plus years in the classroom, I can tell you that awful kids generally have truly messed up parents. It's pretty shocking, really. Frequently horrible, in fact. We've had teachers physically attacked during parent conferences in our nice little town in the heart of America, and the parents get a slap on the wrist. I like teaching and have had a rewarding career, but I would not do it again. I don't want my kid to become a teacher either. That really says a lot, doesn't it? A story from my friend who's a high school teacher. A student turned in an exam with suspiciously similar solutions to a person near them. From past performance and the seating arrangement, it was clear which one of them was copying. My friend had some of the other teachers look through the exams to see if they would notice the same thing, which they all did. The student's mother came in and said that the teacher just didn't like her daughter and was just accusing her of cheating for that reason. When the principal said that several other teachers agreed with the assessment that her daughter had cheated, the mother said, "Well, then the teacher put her next to a good student to force her to cheat so she would get in trouble." I'm sorry, what? Is this lady delusional? My mother is a teacher. This is only the worst one. There are more. She was teaching a class in elementary school that had a severely mentally handicapped girl in it. I'm talking constant drooling, unable to form words, just grunts and moans and yells. She clearly belonged in special ed, but her parents refused. They insisted she be put in a normal class because she doesn't need special ed. The classes were completely useless for her, and her noise and mess seriously disrupted the education of 30 other students. The school even had to pay an aide to be with her all day because she couldn't take care of herself. When the school finally decided to go ahead and put her in special ed, the parents sued the district because apparently their 12-year-old with the mentality of a 3 to 4-year-old did not belong in special ed in their minds. Teachers had to spend their days in court instead of their classrooms, and my mom had to deal with lawyers and parents telling her she had no idea what was best for their kid. The only winners in this scenario are the lawyers. My dad is a principal and once suspended a girl for wearing a shirt that showed her whole stomach and then refused to put on another shirt to cover herself up. This was not her first or her worst offense, and he was fed up. The parents came in to discuss the situation. The dad didn't want to believe his daughter should be suspended, so he attempted to lunge at my dad and fight him. He called him all kinds of names and said he was going to mess him up. I can't remember, but I think the dad ended up getting arrested. My story isn't so bad, but I once worked with a parent who was really racist and tried to build a completely ridiculous case about why her son couldn't work with our black instructors. She wouldn't even look at them. Other than that, I'm constantly dealing with parents who are completely in denial about their children's abilities and have insane expectations, which is pretty horrible. All parents want their kids to be amazing and be the best, but let's be honest, not all of them have that potential. My wife is an experienced teacher. We live in a fairly rural northern area, and the school she just left is in one of the poorer towns. Typical bad was going an entire year without ever seeing a kid's parents or getting any response to correspondence. Also typical was kids without coats, hats, or gloves. She collected from our friends and left extras out in class. She had her personal property stolen all the time. Worse, kids dealing in the 7th and 8th grade, girls cutting and drinking and things like that, to dealing with assault trauma, girls pregnant, boys with fractured skulls, lost eyes, and fights with older boys and adults. Worst was a stretch of 7 years in which every year she had at least one of the following: kid's parent murdered, kid murdered, one time 2 in 1 year, kid's parent murdered the other parent, kid's parent took their own life, or kid's parent murdered another parent then took their own life. I finally convinced her she's paid her dues and she needed to take a break for her own sanity, making $20,000 less now at an alternative school, but doesn't cry every day. That's gotta be a heartbreaking situation to have to deal with every day for years. I can't begin to imagine. I had a student whose mother had divorced his father and both had remarried. He lived with his mom and stepdad, and his biological dad wasn't in his life. Just before his freshman year of high school, this was the year I had him, his biological father allegedly assaulted his stepdaughter and was facing possible jail time. For reasons that are a complete mystery to me, my student's mom started giving all the money she could to the father to help pay for legal expenses. I have no clue why she would do this, and especially why the stepdad would agree to it. My student had no winter coat and received nothing for Christmas because they couldn't afford it. All the money went to his deadbeat dad instead of him and his siblings, and he had a 5-year-old sister with special needs. The saddest part, he told me he was sure his father was guilty. Why would you take away money from a child who has all kinds of potential to give it to a scumbag who's just going to be going to prison? We had an over-attentive and incredibly enthusiastic parent of a 4-year-old girl that suffered from shaken baby syndrome. The child was very emotionally stunted, couldn't walk, and could barely speak. It was really sad, and she wasn't making much progress. Whenever we would get time to talk to her mother about her daughter's care, she would immediately change the direction of the conversation to be about herself. There also were several stories floating around in regard to how her child got this way. Absolutely none of them made sense and were constantly changing. Without giving away a lot of personal information, over time it became pretty obvious that super special ed mom had some kind of Munchausen by proxy. But we had no proof, and just had to watch the little girl for any other signs of abuse, such as incorrect medications, cuts, or bruises, and if found, report it to a nurse and guidance counselor that would alert CPS. I left a few months after this drama and never heard any follow-up about it. My first and only year teaching 8th grade was a doozy. I was 21, and all my energy and excitement about teaching was quickly zapped by parents dead set on proving me incapable of doing my job. I had parents sending graded papers back to me with my comments corrected and challenged. One day, I was called into the headmaster's office to discuss my use of foul language in the classroom after a parent learned I had told a kid to stop dorking around. The worst by far was a mother who somehow got my cell number and just constantly harassed me at the end of the year, all because she wanted her child to get a wholly undeserved A. This mother had a reputation, but I was in no way prepared for her full-out abuse. When her daughter, whom I'd repeatedly suggested to receive some kind of outside academic assistance, ended up with a generous B- in the class, she just lost it. I was visiting my sick grandmother when she started texting me, demanding to see the final exams. Being as they were final exams, I was not intending to return them to the students. However, this woman had the headmaster so wrapped up in her crazy that he called me and requested that I have my landlord open my house door so someone could go grab the exams while I was out of town. This is on top of the mom's text messages like, "You'll never work again," and "Those tests are mine. I paid for them. I want what I deserve." At what point does this kind of thing become harassment? I had a student who dressed in the goth fashion, black pants and metal band t-shirt, long hair and polished nails. He was bullied relentlessly by boys, girls, and even other teachers. Every day I'd try to fend off the verbal abuse, knowing my classroom was the only 45-minute reprieve he would get. Soon he joined science club just so he'd have a pass to eat in my room at lunch instead of the cafeteria. He was a really smart kid. He easily aced the tests and helped along the other students with labs. I saw him building friendships in class. Then he started skipping school. He started missing my class and falling behind. When he came back after close to 2 weeks, he was even more withdrawn. He came to class and he turned in all the work he'd missed. He checked my website, but skipped out on science club. After a few days of this pattern and him refusing to talk to me, I called home. My intent was to tell his parents how worried I was for him. My worry was he might hurt himself. I said, "Hello, I'm calling about your son blank. I'm his biology teacher." Before I could go any further, his mom says, "I don't need to hear it. I'm pulling him out of school tomorrow. He's his own problem now." She hung up on me and I cried. I talked to my principal and student counselor and they promised they'd look into it. But he was withdrawn from school that week. He's still in my mind 5 years later. I'll always wonder what happened because I was a little goth kid once too. That's great that you reached out to this kid that you saw was having problems. You probably really did something great for them. Sometimes it's a shame the parents have as much control as they do.
What's one thing from the 1990s that will never be popular again? Being in front of the TV with friends and family at a certain time to watch a certain show, and if you missed it, you missed it. Free AOL Frisbees in the mail. Here's $20. I'll pick you up at 8 when the mall closes. Don't talk to strangers. Payphones. Really hoping parachute pants come back? Personally, I've got a soft spot for Jinko jeans. Pogs, even if Alf comes back for it.
Hey Bart, you know Alf? He's back in Pog form.
The golden age of shareware, the idea of actually owning the software you buy and decent file sharing through Napster before companies inundated LimeWire and the like with virus-infected decoy seeds. Get off the internet, I need to use the phone! Yo, MTV Raps.
Palm Pilots.
What the figgity-uck is a Palm Pilot? Oh, a PDA. I'd see them around a lot, and I remember wanting one real badly, but I wouldn't know what it was for, and why the hell would I even have one, because I was a feral ADHD goblin child. Phone booths. Rewatching The Matrix is a constant reminder of this. The film still holds up incredibly well, but the technology doesn't so much unless you can suspend your belief for the time period. See, when I was a kid, I thought The Matrix was cool. I especially thought that Matrix 2 Reloaded was cool, but now I'm older, I don't really like the films anymore. Purchased cell phone ringtones. You have received a collect call from, "Hey mom, I'm fine and going to a friend's house." Burning CDs for every occasion and writing said occasion on CD with Sharpie. Honestly, I think that's a nice, charming way of just cataloging memories and important moments in your life that are connected to a song. Y2K hype. There were a ton of futuristic shows and movies about the net. Let's just say it turned out differently and less cool than portrayed. Not really a 90s show or anything, or even franchise, but Mega Man Battle Network I always thought had like a pretty cool impression of the internet. Like with the net navies and everything. Tamagotchi. Hope for the future. I don't see Discmans making a comeback or those white seashell and coral necklace things everyone had, boys and girls both. Surprisingly, rollerblading seems to be making a bit of a comeback though. I see them at skate parks now quite often. They actually rip too, grinding flat bars and stuff. Remember free refills at coffee shops and ashtrays on every table? Affordable housing. Hope, progress, an idea of a better and happy future for all mankind. Jinko jeans. Not having a cell phone or anyone expecting you to have a phone on you at all times. VHS tapes and DVDs. Oh, we'll see who has the last laugh when the world goes to pot, the internet goes down, rendering the streaming services useless, and then I'm there with my Malcolm in the Middle all seasons DVD box set, my bicycle hooked up to a generator so I can power my TV and DVD player. We'll see who has the last laugh. But for real, DVDs are super cool. Physical media is king, and sometimes they come with really cool bonuses like behind-the-scenes information and whatnot, which can be really fun to look into. First-run syndication TV shows. Back in the late 80s and early 90s, there were really only three major networks, ABC, NBC, CBS, with PBS and Fox having just launched. But Fox was still a very new thing that struggled to fill airtime. There were a lot of independent TV stations, though, that aired mostly reruns, old movies, game shows, etc. Then, Star Trek The Next Generation premiered in '87 as a first-run syndication show, meaning it aired on whatever local network wanted to pay for the rights on any day at any time. It was a huge success, and suddenly there was a ton of action-adventure shows going to first-run syndication. Those local stations that had nothing to show on certain nights loved it. Baywatch was directly syndicated and was one of the most watched TV shows in the world for one point. Then there was Xena, Hercules, ST, DS9, Babylon 5, Relic Hunter, Viper, and just a ton of other light-hearted action-adventure TV that doesn't really exist anymore. As a 90s kid, it was great. When UPN and the WB formed, a lot of those independent stations didn't need to fill airtime anymore. By 2000, the market had shrunk, and today, with streaming, it's gone for good. Those t-shirts that reacted to heat and changed color? It turns out that bright purple armpits never became acceptable. I think the brand was Global Hypercolor. One of those inventions. Just because you can make it doesn't mean you should. I don't know, those shirts sound kinda cool actually, just on the concept alone. The creation of a major television network, or the attempt to do so. After Fox succeeded in the mid-80s to create the Big Four, and remember that PBS counts as a major as well, you saw attempts like the WB, UPN, and their merger in the CW. With streaming services, weblets, and specialized networks that only deal with a single topic, like the Weather Channel and ESPN, proliferating the airwaves, there's never going to be an appetite for another major network, or the rationale present to develop the funding necessary to create and sustain it until it becomes self-supporting. Not in the reality we're all currently living in. To do so, you have to have several things: a national news division, a dedicated sports division, a production division capable of turning out massive amounts of sustainable content, and it has to be scripted as well as non-scripted content, or reality television as it's called. A schedule that covers the entire week for at least 8 to 12 hours of original content daily, and a national network of television affiliates that broadcast your content, and in the cases of your news division, represent your main network in that affiliate's broadcast area. I remember how difficult it was for Fox back in the 80s, but as a fellow student in radio and television pointed out to me, they have a national news division, a weekly schedule, content, and local affiliates nationwide. Don't let anyone fool you, they are a network. And it's never going to happen again. Okay, being a media student, I find this stuff really interesting. I was not expecting a double feature on things like, about syndication and how Fox established itself as a giant network or whatever, but I don't think I completely agree with the idea that there'll never be a new TV network or something like that, because streaming platforms, from what I can tell, while they are somewhat profitable, they just don't seem like they're as profitable anymore as people like to think, and they're very restrictive business-wise, because the instant that you try to change anything, people are really finicky with it. It's like, oh, I thought I was going to get everything all at once in a week, and now more and more shows are going back to releasing an episode a week or something. Or the fact that all of them are now trying to make more money off of people by restricting how many people can really have an account at once, I wouldn't be surprised if regular old TV made a comeback eventually. Limp Bizkit. They're one of the few bands unable to capitalize on nostalgic fans and have to cancel their last 2 tours for safety concerns and personal health reasons, which methinks is face-saving code for poor ticket sales. I actually rather like Limp Bizkit, and after they've said that, I might see if they're touring through England. Running home from the playground to watch and record your favorite cartoons on the VHS, spending hours at the video store, or reserving your favorite movies in advance. I still remember the 2+1 deal and how happy I was when I got an extra movie. Colored ketchup. Did anyone say Carrot Top yet? Pontiac Sunfire. PlayStation 1. While the PlayStation 1 itself is definitely not going to be making a comeback anytime soon, I do believe that the appeal of low poly graphics, like based on PlayStation 1 graphics, are slowly and gradually becoming more and more popular among people as an aesthetic choice. Smoking in restaurants. Shoulder pads. I could have swore shoulder pads were like a 70s thing. Pet rocks, like the ones that were actually sold. Cereal box prizes that are actually in the box and don't require a sign-up or something. I once got Lion King themed limited edition Pogs from a cereal box, had to save 3 barcodes and mail them in. They were awesome. Otherwise, there was always a gift or toy in the box. I miss those days. Companies don't use promotions like this anymore because they know we'll have to eat anyway. No need to market food anymore or make it appealing or exciting. So sad. Sony Walkman and Discman. Peanut butter and jam in the same jar. For good reason, that sounds awful. Then again, apparently English peanut butter and American peanut butter are 2 completely different beasts. I don't think movies like the original Blair Witch Project 1999 would have the hype it did. The internet changed a lot of things. That website with its lore, hidden secrets, and that most folks then couldn't go Google to see it was obviously fake. The number of people that believed it was real was insane. That would never happen today. Cheat codes and hidden characters are mostly gone now because of the internet. The secrets to unlock hidden characters in Mortal Kombat 1 and 2 were all word of mouth. When playing Tears of the Kingdom, I can literally find out every secret item on launch day. Very different from the original Legend of Zelda, where you had a map of the overworld that came with the game and were told, good luck. And yeah, it is too easy to complete games nowadays with the internet. Even I'm guilty of using the internet when I get really, really stuck in a game somewhere, though. What I really hate, though, is when games nowadays glitch out so badly that they just stop you from progressing, and you're like, what am I doing wrong? And then you get told, oh, you've just glitched. Other people have had the same problem. Oh, that's a good one, actually. Games being made and shipped as complete products worthy of the price you're paying day one. Having a face and body that hasn't been altered in some way or filtered and edited in photos. I remember when the furthest we would go to deceive people about our appearance was wearing a push-up bra. Yeah, filters are just super lame nowadays, and plus, let's be honest, I think people have trained their eyes now to be able to tell when a filter is being used. Smoking the devil's lettuce from an aluminum can. Furbies. Mofos being sensitive about everything. Play-Doh, Slinkies, boy bands, video rental stores, Will and Jada Smith. Laserdisc, Trapper Keepers, Paul Frank brand. I feel like there only used to be 15 famous people. Nowadays there are 100,000 famous people that you've never heard of. Polaroid nudes from your significant other. Teachers telling students that they can't speak a language other than English in class because I know you're talking about me. Prank calls before caller ID. Talking to your beloved on a landline with your family listening in because the only phone in the house is in your living room and your granny is making pumping motions with her hips whilst the rest of your family is giggling in the background. Screw that. Nah, mate, you just can't take the banter. Not sure if it was popular exactly due to limited release, but OK Cola. It was okay. My college roommate and I used to call the 1800 number repeatedly to hear OK jokes or get free coupons. We loved it. Probably everything I just said will never return. Human decency. There are far too many people going for imaginary internet points these days. Luckily, Eurodance boy bands phenomena like Take That and Backstreet Boys, Unlucky, Grunge, and Nirvana, Movie Phone, Aquanet, payphones, and phone books. When you think about the level of convenience that we have compared to, say, the 80s or even the 90s or 2000s even, it is crazy. Checking the free TV guide from the Sunday paper to find out which of the Cinemax or Showtime was going to have a softcore smut that shows breasts after your parents went to bed. Wait, maybe that was the late 80s.
Blockbuster, Purple Tomato Sauce, Saturday Disney Cartoons, Moon Boots, Pogs, Orbit Soda, Dial-Up Internet, Portable CD Players, WCW, Tamagotchis, and Fanny Packs.
In England, we call them bum bags because 1, fanny pack sounds stupid, and 2, well, it's kind of a gendered word here in England. Lunch tickets. Back then, we will get a yellow and black ticket calendar to get our food, and we had to give them to a ticketer. Green, yellow, and red cards for behavior. This was elementary. If your card was green, you'll get a surprise or some sort of pizza party. If your card was red, you'll get no pizza party, nor prize, and you'll do standards. Yellow was like a warning to get your act together. Spinner rims, like what were people thinking? Real comedy. I feel like you can't push boundaries anymore. Drawing animation. Long, dumb arguments about some trivia where there was no clear answer, so everyone left still believing they were right. When I was in middle school, you couldn't just pull out your smartphone to Google if Marilyn Manson actually removed a set of ribs so he could suck his own mini Manson. Hit shows with 1990s TV production value. There was such a vast difference between TV and movies. Shows like X-Files and NYPD Blue were very much exceptions in terms of production value. Most stuff looked cheap and shoddy. I mean, me personally, I would rather pick classic Magnum P.I. over, say, the more recent CWDC shows, because, God, those look awful now. I remember when my friends were raving about how good Arrow or maybe even The Flash were back in the 20-teens or whatever. But now, God, they have fallen. Those big wooden roundabouts with no seats or handles. Kids actually being kids. I loved running around the small green with my school pals. The whole be back when the streetlights come on is a way of knowing what time we had to be home. The fact that social skills were an actual thing. The lack of mind-numbing tech. And Snake. If you're wondering and don't know what he means by Snake, it's basically an old game. I used to be with it. Then they changed what it was. Now what I'm with isn't it, and what is it seems weird and scary to me. It'll happen to you. Very, very underrated Simpsons quote in my opinion. Lead paint poisoning. I remember always seeing lawyer commercials about getting compensation. Not pleasant, but popular. Absolute golden age of Cartoon Network and Adult Swim. So many classic cartoons were created at that time. Unfortunately, my eyeballs would not wipe their butts with Cartoon Network at this point. I'm not sure if they mean like Cartoon Network or Adult Swim being at their best anymore, because I don't know, the characters and cartoons of the 90s are still revered to this day. I mean, there was that cartoon recently called Jellystone, I think, which is literally just all of the Hanna-Barbera cartoons, save for Scooby-Doo, I think. Living in a town, and I think they gender swapped a bunch of the characters because otherwise it would just be a huge sausage fest. Out of the Hanna-Barbera cartoons, I rather like Top Cat and Snagglepuss. Don't know why they're both cats, but I always liked it when Snagglepuss went, "Heavens to Murgatroyd!" Anyone remember the Hanna-Barbera Cartoon Olympics? Having an attention span, like even just watching TV without constantly checking the phone to look up something. Well, you see, buddy, you're talking to the wrong guy here, 'cause I was born with ADHD. I've never had an attention span. Shell suits, hopefully. Jimmy Savile. For those of you who don't know who Jimmy Savile is, you're probably American or something like that. Basically, he was a BBC presenter who got caught being a kiddie diddler. I say caught, but it was more that everyone knew he was a kiddie diddler, but he had so much influence and power, essentially, as a celebrity, like one of the biggest celebrities in the UK for a time, I think, that basically no one could do anything about it until he died, and then basically everything spilled out about how the BBC colluded with him and stuff like that. It was a whole freaking thing when it happened. That one phone line that you would call and they would tell you the time. TV shows only having 3 commercials for a break. Then it went to 6. Going to clubs and raves with huge sound systems until 6 a.m., the UK government put laws in place to stop people openly partying all night long. From what I can tell from watching old shows, basically calling people gay as though it's top banter. I would say jelly shoes because of how goddamn uncomfortable they were, but they're back. Pages and everyone having a code so you knew who was paging you. Wearing clothes backwards, it was a whole vibe. I just don't believe you. I don't believe that wearing your clothes backwards was ever a vibe. Flip phones? Well, you say that, and yet the Samsung flip phone came out a couple years ago, and I absolutely love mine. Like when I finally moved on from my 90s Nokia flip phone to whatever the hell I got in 2013 as my first actual my new phone or whatever, I was just there like, man, I wish this was a flip phone. And then finally in 2022 or 2021, Samsung answered my prayers and I frickin' love it. Having a low spending market, everything seems to be increasing by the day. Vanilla Ice. Hip hugger pants with a thong peeking out. Very common in the mid to late 90s. Visiting people in person randomly. Like people would just drop by or we'd be out and stop by to see a friend. We were more hospitable, had more free time, and there was no cell phone, so it wasn't like you could call, so expectations were different. You know, when I first read that, I thought it said randomly visiting people in prison. I was like, what? Having to wait till 9 to call your girlfriend so you could get free minutes? Apparently, gaming in person with 2 players. I'm told you need separate consoles now. That actually annoys me nowadays with all of like the development that we've made in gaming and technology, in gaming and whatnot. Multiplayer is kind of stagnant, especially local co-op and everything. Like as someone who is a younger brother and whose brother didn't want to play games with him, or like, you know, he played single player games all the time. I wanted more games where I could actually like play through the entire game with my brother or my friends or whatever. It's just something that I think more games need to concentrate on. Flesh out multiplayer mechanics for God's sake. Afraid of the dark on Nickelodeon. It is impossible to explain to someone who wasn't there how cool the Macarena was the first week. The Jerry Springer Show. Gas was 89 cents a gallon and cigarettes were $9.99 a carton. Inflation's a female dog, honey. Internet cafes with full tables of boxy desktop computers and you had to like pay by the hour to use it sometimes. I used to love this skeezy internet cafe that I used to go to with my friends. We'd play Call of Duty, S4 League, Dawn of War, or like mods of Warcraft with One Piece and Bleach characters. And they'd host all-nighters once a week on a Friday and you'd be there till like 6 a.m. playing whatever the hell you want and they'd give us the keys and people would make like snack runs and everything. Man, those were good times. Animorphs books and the short-lived TV show. I think someone's making like a comic that's still going now actually of Animorphs. Hamster dance. Really elaborate home theater setups, component stereo systems. In mainstream use, I know there are still niche enthusiasts. Our first house was pre-wired in the family room for surround sound speakers. I would actually love a home theater system. Doing research using encyclopedias and dictionaries. Excessively violent, borderline hentai anime. Oh yeah, they don't make them like they used to. I remember watching the frickin' Guyver on a VHS when I was a kid with my mom and stuff. That was crazy. It was literally the show that told me or showed me that heroes don't always win. Or something like Ninja Scroll, which, God, do not watch Ninja Scroll if you have a weak constitution and are afraid of, well, some pretty violent and horrible sexual stuff going on. Because I remember when I was 13 years old, my mom's friend was like, oh, he likes anime? I got him an anime DVD. Didn't even bother to look at the fact that it was an 18 plus. Also, please, believe me, I know some of you hate when I do too much commentary on these, but if I weren't doing this, I would literally be saying POG about 1,000 more times. Late night TV psychics, Miss Cleo, Sylvia Brown, John Edward, etc. Some of them couldn't even predict their own demise. Apparently Surge, the gateway soda to a booger sugar habit. Life. Back in the 90s, life was so much better for a lot of reasons. We were much happier than today and we didn't have technology. We had more privacy than today before social media came by. Things were cheaper than today. My parents used to buy the newspaper for 15 cents back then. Today, it's €1.50 for the daily one. As a kid, I was much happier meeting other kids at school and we used to play a lot. Something like a shoebox was like winning the lottery. School used to be more exciting than today. I loved coloring books as a child. There weren't any automated phone phone systems back then, and you used to get on the phone with a company with ease. Everyone used to go outside for services, and we used to meet a lot of people, have a chat, and I used to play with anything. Riding the bus used to cost 15 cents. Today it's €2 before the government made them free. McDonald's used to be like a Disneyland to me. The toys used to be like winning the lottery. Street food like pasties used to cost 8 cents, and I used to eat 2 of them, and they were pretty good. Today you need to spend 60 cents for 1 pasty. TV shows were better than today's. I really loved Power Rangers and Baywatch, and I still love them till this day. MTV used to be about music and not reality shows. It used to be exciting. You didn't need to pay to watch TV back then, and it used to be good. Today, to watch TV, you have to pay only to see garbage being aired on the television. I do think that ever since modern technology emerged and life became faster, it's no longer the life I once knew. Everything is becoming boring nowadays. Inflation is a real female dog. Life was so much better back then. I still miss the 90s. Like, no duh, inflation sucks, and yeah, of course, everyone's gonna miss the times when they were younger and everything, and happier and whatnot because they were a kid. It's nostalgia and whatnot. I think the most probably profound thing that they said was about how the rapid expansion of technology, fast living, and things like people being made redundant from simple jobs like phone lines and everything. I hate it when they put me through to a robot when I want to talk to a person who could fix my very, very specific problem that the robot or whatever, or the automated phone system just doesn't give me the option to do. But I guess I'll stop there because the deeper I get into that topic, the more depressed I'll become. Good night, all! When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories. And if you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Linked in the description below.